but we do have a quorum, so we're going to get started. We are going to excuse Councilmember Luke. He is on vacation. Councilmember Wharton is returning from vacation, so you'll see him pop in and out, I think, throughout the meeting. Councilmember Fowler had a medical issue with someone, but she'll be back and forth. So you'll see council members popping in and out. So we're going to go straight into the first item, but we had two written briefing items. If you're following along, one is some council role and open government agendas paperwork, and the other one is a resolution for a council policy manual update on agendas and paperwork. Were there any questions on those? Great. So we're into item number 3, which is the library fund budget amendment for fiscal year 2019 and 20. At the table from the council office, we have Russell Weeks, and from, I believe, the administration, we have Lou Marzuliev, who's the library board president, Peter Bromberg, the library executive director, and Jace Bunting, the finance director. Did I miss anyone?
Yes, Lou won't be with us, but Debbie Ehrman, deputy director, will be with us.
Even better.
I won't tell Lou you said that.
Perfect. So, Russell.
Well, to begin, this is a proposed budget amendment. This is a briefing on the proposed amendment. If the council forwards it for action, it's already set a public hearing date for December 3rd with potential final action on December 10th. This is the briefing on the proposed budget amendment. The two top major proposed amendments would be for a system-wide facilities study and a proposal to hire an in-house security team instead of contracting.
And is that a master plan facilities update?
Yes.
Great. Anything else, Russell?
That's all from me.
How about Director Bromberg?
Yeah, what would you like to know?
Well, let's see. Do you have anything you wanted to add, or should we open it up to questions?
Yeah, I don't have anything to add. I'm happy to open it up to questions. Or I mean, if it would be helpful for me to run through real quickly.
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, so our master facilities plan, this is a kind of a once-in-a-generation analysis that we're doing. If you recall, last year we completed a facilities conditions assessment. That was really about looking at systems, roofs, air conditioning, plumbing, all the things that have a lifespan. And we're now working off of that to do our deferred maintenance over the next 10 years. The master facilities plan is really looking at this from a much larger perspective in terms of looking over across the next 20 years or more of the city in terms of growth, demographic growth, where it's happening, and then looking at our 8 facilities, looking at the space, the amount of space, the flexibility of the space, and also looking at the changing way in which people are using libraries, and we anticipate library use to change, and asking the question of, are these facilities going to be adequate over the next 20 years, coming up with recommendations for renovations, expansions. Traditionally, master facilities plans also look at new building if that's needed, et cetera. And at the end of this process, we'll have a recommendation for all of that with estimated price tag with that. So this, the 200 and where's the amount on there? 400 is the amount that we need to pay for the consultants that are doing the master facilities plan. Currently, we had budgeted in the previous fiscal year, we significantly under budgeted for that, initially thinking of a much smaller scope in terms of what we'd be looking at, and really in going out to RFP and looking at the proposals and looking at the scope, which is including, and it's in process now, public engagement sessions, staff engagement sessions, and a good deal of analysis of demographics of growth, et cetera, just underestimated really what the scope would look like. And so this would give us the funds to fully fund that and reflect the actual cost of that plan. The $78,500 to hire 4 full-time security personnel, we have been working with CBI as our security for the last so many years, and over the last, I guess it's 2 years now, we have been moving towards bringing security in-house, beginning with the hiring of a security manager, and then that security manager hiring 2 people to come in-house as full-time library employee, safety officers, security officers. that was done as somewhat of a test, so like let's bring them in one by one and seeing if this works for us. We anticipated continuing down this path incrementally over the next few years to bring security in-house and still having CBI doing things like patrols and special events, et cetera. We got a quote from CBI a few months ago in July with a price increase that when we got that price increase, we said, well, that's getting close to what it would cost us to just bring everyone in-house now. And then we also got some other quotes from local security that were actually even higher. So we made the decision at that point to, if we're going to be paying this additional money, let's just go ahead and speed up our timeline for bringing security in-house now, which has a number of benefits for us, which we can talk about. And so that represents the additional cost, which, yeah.
Yes.
Question about that. To the second policy question, Russell's
Sure.
memo, is it specific to the main library, or would any of them be at other library locations?
Right. So this is our security for the whole system, the home base is the main library, but they do have schedules where they're out visiting other libraries based on the time of day and the needs, and are also available on an as-needed basis. And I don't know, Debbie, if you want to add anything to that.
Yes, that's true, and they often go and do a patrol, or not even a patrol, they kind of a visit at some of the branch locations based on what the branch manager has been requesting. So this will give us a total of, including our security manager, 7 in-house security officers, and our security manager, Chris Denny, felt that we could easily still cover what we currently provide to our branches as well as main library. Now, as far as patrols go, though, we do depend on a contracted security service, which is CBI currently, to do like overnight patrols of some of the branches where we've had some issues, in the middle of the night. So.
Mr. Chair, can I ask one more? So does that mean that you would continue with CBI for some services? Would it be a reduction of your current cost and then a shift toward, in this budget amendment request,
That is correct.
more in-house spending?
Yes.
Okay.
Then moving down to the grant funds for the community wellness liaisons, this is a really interesting, exciting grant that we just received in partnership with the University of Utah to hire 3 full-time community wellness liaisons to help library customers with health-related questions and services, specifically focused on traditionally underserved populations. This is no additional cost to the library. This is grant funded. It's just to reflect the change in our budget so that we can bring it out of fund balance and expend the money. Actually, I'm sorry. Oh, part-time. I'm sorry.
Yes.
What kind of community wellness programs do you think this will be? Like, is it just
Yeah.
physical? Is it eating healthier?
Yeah, I want to invite Liesl Jacobson, who is our Assistant Director of Community Engagement, up to address any questions about this, as she's been very involved with working with the university to
Awesome.
get this grant. So, yeah, wonderful.
Hi.
Hi.
So that question is a little bit to be determined.
Okay.
One of the purposes of this project is to increase relationship building within these diverse communities in our city. And we know that some of the outcomes of that work will determine what areas of health we focus on. This University of Utah group considers health to be 7 aspects of health. I can't remember what each of them is, but they include things such as physical, mental, and even financial health.
Okay. All right. Well, and the reason why I ask is because I like to sometimes leverage or connect programs and resources that are already happening within the city and connect all of you guys together so that it's even bigger and better and
That's great.
the impact. So for instance, the sustainability department works with food access for underserved communities. So is this something that you guys can talk to them and see what they're doing? Is it complementary? Is it something that you can work together with, or have programs, or events in the library that is related to what they do? That's one aspect of it. But then we also have the family one. I can't remember the department where Angela Romero runs. Like last week, there was a festival at the Glendale Library about was it clean air? Oh, I'm so sorry, right? And it was about wellness, about for the community, for underserved communities. And so, if we can talk, and see how we can make this bigger and better, awesome. I think we should do that.
Great.
Yeah.
I'll give you
so-
my card.
All right. Thanks.
Other questions? Councilmember Johnston?
Yeah, do you have any sense about data that shows an increased need for more security? It sounds like this is just an offset in security. You have current security needs now, you're just changing who's providing them in-house versus external, right?
Yes.
Okay, so there's not necessarily an increase you're seeing in the need for it, but just cost savings. It seems like it's better to have it in-house.
Well, it's not even necessarily a cost savings. It's going to be a little bit of an increased cost from what CBI was quoting us. I believe it's actually a little bit less than what we got from some other quotes. But the other benefits are, with staff in-house and having 40-hour full-time people, we can provide more consistent training, quality control. CBI, there's a little bit more turnover and less control, et cetera. Yeah. So.
Okay. Yeah, just to clarify for the public, so it's not necessarily you're seeing an increase in problems at the libraries. This is an administrative thing to give you more flexibility and greater resources.
Correct.
Safe way to say it? I don't know.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's not in response to an increased perception of need. Yeah.
Okay.
The last item was simply an oversight in our budget from last year, that there was we have a statistical program that we are using, and we just did not put it in the budget. So it's a small amount, and just correcting that oversight.
Okay. Any other questions? Great. Appreciate you all being here. And like Russell said, it looks like the next action for us will be hold the hearing, accept public comment Tuesday, December 3rd at 7 p.m.
Okay.
So, thank you.
If I may say something that is just from the heart, I appreciate you all being here, honestly. I don't know, I've been really feeling this strongly of late, that public service is a tough gig, and I'm really appreciative of everyone who puts themselves forward to engage in this public service. I'm not sucking up or anything. It's just, it's just an honest feeling that has really been coming to the service. So I just want to take this opportunity to express my appreciation. Let me put on my constituent hat as a resident of Salt Lake City,
We
not as library
appreciate it,
director.
too,
So
and I
thank
think-
you.
And I think one of the things I appreciate the most, and I keep repeating, I feel like I repeat myself, but without you guys and the work that we do, we couldn't even potentially think or do or make decisions if it wasn't for your professionalism and for the work that you put into it. So thank you so much as well.
Well,
We
thank you.
appreciate that.
Appreciate it. All right. Have a good afternoon.
Yep. Okay. We're on to item number 4, which is we're looking at an ordinance for single-room occupancy text amendments follow-up. And we still have Russell Weeks from council office here at the table, and we have our planning director for Salt Lake City, Nick Norris. And Wayne Mills from, who's a planning manager.
Bunch of people.
We got some more. Well, we'll have is Ashley here?
Have one.
Great.
Yes.
Thank you.
So I think I got everyone except you.
Hi, I'm Allison Parks from the City Attorney's Office.
Yes, of course you are. Thanks, Allison. All right, Russell, this is a follow-up, correct?
Well, I'm going to rely on Councilmember Mendenhall's goodwill if I'm oversimplifying this thing. But the original briefing was on March 5th, 2019. And there was a public hearing where people expressed concerns about the equitability of where SROs might be located, even though the amendments contemplate expanding the locations of SROs. The result of that was a meeting between housing providers, the administration, or housing advocates, the administration, and Councilmember Mendenhall and Fowler. And as a result of that, I believe that the two council members wanted to at least take a second look at the locations outlined in the proposed ordinance and see how equitable the distribution is. In addition, the planning division is looking for some direction from the council on if the council decides to go ahead with this second look, to give them an indication of what the priority is on that. And the third thing is and I hope it's serendipity, the report includes the attachment by that James Wood presented last week about about the opportunity zones, which I thought might be one way to measure the equitability of the proposed ordinance.
I think you did a good job, apparently. I'm looking over at Mayor-elect Mendenhall. Okay.
Great job, Russell. And we had, I think, a productive meeting with planning staff and some housing advocates. And Councilmember Valdemoros, were you in that meeting? I think Councilmember Fowler was. Was it just Councilmember Fowler and me? Okay, well, anyway, it was productive, and so I was grateful for the administration's participation, and you had such a clear willingness to listen to the ideas and the concerns from those meetings. So let's get into it.
Okay. I don't know how you guys want to start. I think we were intending to kind of answer some questions, but I can maybe give my perception of that meeting, and I do agree. I think it was very productive. I think the main thing that it did, I think, is identify a lot of bigger picture housing issues that we have in the city. This is just one small part of those. We have a lot bigger issues, and it comes down, frankly, to how we're zoned and where we can build housing in the city. We've been looking at, not just in this proposal, but just in general, where you can build housing in the city, how our zoning works, the things that are beneficial that prohibit housing, like preservation of foothills and City Creek Canyon, around the airport, all of those things. And when it comes down to it, there's just not a lot of land available for housing in the city. We think that there is, because what we see is everything that's being built in the downtown and in Sugar House and in our other corridors in North Temple, but it makes up a very small percentage. So I'm gonna try to just give you an idea of what that means. So of all the land in Salt Lake City, we can build housing on basically 21% of it. So in the single family zones take up about 12.5% of that, which leaves the other 8.5% to 9% for all the other types of housing out there. As a result, it ends up, the way we're zoned is concentrating a lot of the other types of housing at all price points. And that's why we're kind of facing some of these issues that we're facing and dealing with some of the pressures we're dealing with. How that relates to SROs is that we also have some numbers about how this proposal expands it, because there is a question about the west side versus east side. For the purpose of this conversation, we looked at lands west of I-15 and lands east of I-15. So right now, west of I-15, there's 484 acres of land where you could build an SRO. That's all in the TSA zones. Under the proposal, it would increase to 1,264, so an increase of almost 800 acres. Most of that increase is in Council District 2 by adding the CC and CG zones that exist along Redwood Road, 2100 South, and the 700 West corridor. District 1 has a 4-acre increase because of a small piece of CC zone property on Redwood Road, I think. Actually, yeah, Redwood. East of I-15, there's 204 acres of land that currently allows an SRO. That's in the TSA zone along 400 South and in the form-based zones in the Central 9th neighborhood. The increase goes up to 1,850 acres. That's rounded, but that's an increase of 1,642. So in total, we're increasing the acres about 2,400 acres, 2/3 of which is east of I-15. Again, most of that increase in whole is in the CC and CG zones, which account for the largest percentage of mixed-use zone land in the city. Those are our two biggest zones, CG and CC. So our proposal, our intent was to expand where an SRO could go. So right now, because we are so restricted, and most of the areas where they could go are west of I-15 in areas where there is a concentration, as everybody knows, of the lower income housing and lower income households. So this proposal would expand that to more places, but it does take in some additional neighborhoods where those two conditions also exist, around the ballpark, 300 West corridor, et cetera. I think there were some things out of that meeting that were beneficial. I think for me, one of the big takeaways is the importance of what we call these and changing that terminology, because I think it helps change the conversation a little bit. So that is certainly something that I think we would hope to amend the proposal to deal with. There were a number of suggestions made during the meeting, whether it was non-traditional housing or communal housing. I think there were a couple other things, but we can certainly look at a different term that doesn't carry the same historical connotations that an SRO does.
Yes, Councilmember
One
Mendenhall.
other thing that came up and is in Russell's policy questions is the urgency, or how would the council want to prioritize this discussion in the context of all the other planning projects that we have going on? And that was another takeaway, I think.
Yeah.
We knew it before, but it really came through in that meeting that with Pamela Atkinson in particular, that these SROs, if they would have been passed back when we had the chance to vote on it or had public hearings and decided to kick it back to the planning department. Let's just say they were on the books today. They could be one of the tools that developers or state people could be using to help people off the streets. Not that that's the only tool, and not that that's the fit for everyone, but the urgency is great. And I think that the interest of potential partners and folks wanting to invest in this type of housing is there. So in my opinion, this is urgent. This is something that we as a council should do what we can to instruct the planning department to prioritize these changes that we've been working with the housing community on. And I'd love to hear if anybody else has thoughts on the urgency of this. If not, I'll just keep talking.
Well, Mr. Chair, if I may make one point with that, there is, one of the other policy questions is to how much can this ordinance be amended before the Planning Commission has to look at it again as an entirely new piece of work?
I don't know. For me, I guess that would be up to, I would ask Nick Norris, what point do we need to go back to the Planning Commission?
So I would think that if we're going to expand this to additional zoning districts, then we would basically be starting over. Meaning we'd have to engage those communities where those zoning districts are and go through that process plus planning commission and then retransmit stuff. And I think part of one of the point of prioritization gets at, you know, do we move forward with what we have proposed and then try to deal with some of these other issues as more of a longer term thing? I think expanding these to other areas or talking bigger picture zoning to address housing issues are going to be a very challenging and long-term discussion based on how difficult it is to even sometimes to change a single piece of property like for 5 feet of building height. I mean, that's a difficult process. And so when we're talking density and housing, it's even more complex and more complicated.
Council members?
I get that point that maybe we should go ahead and approve the process that's been brought to us today, committing to an expansion of the applicable zoning. And I think, you know, as mayor-elect, I'm happy to commit to that. And we didn't have that kind of clarity before today, you know, officially later today.
At 5, I think.
So I'm open to talking about that, the potential to get the tool out there faster and then do the expansion work later so as not to delay the need that's out there today.
I'm comfortable with that as well. So is Councilmember Mendenhall?
Do you have, I mean, as vice chair, do you know if there's capacity for us to make that kind of a vote?
Well, I
this
don't know by the end of the
year?
year if there is.
Right.
But yes, so.
May I add, I think one of the things too that I mentioned earlier is that there are some things that we do want to clarify in the ordinance, like the naming. I think that's a big thing, and we can do that relatively easy with this ordinance because it's just changing the titles of definitions and where it's referenced in the code. But there's also the issue of accessibility, which was a key point brought up and something that if we're going to be an equitable city, we need to provide in all of our housing, not just this type of housing. And so I think those are the two, in my mind, the two most pressing and important things that we could do to the ordinance right now and not delay it more than it would be otherwise.
So just from a calendaring kind of logistics standpoint, I think we'll probably defer to planning to get us those kind of tweaks to the current ordinance that's before the council. I think the council could then decide if you want to have another hearing to allow the public to comment on those tweaks, or you could just say that because they're such small tweaks that, you know, you don't need to reopen a public hearing, but that we'll get that on the agenda as soon as we get those changes from planning, if that's okay.
With future consideration being the bigger picture, right? So.
Mr. Chair, I don't want to belabor that, but the last public hearing was March 26th, 2019, and the council closed that hearing.
What was that? Councilmember Johnston?
2 questions. One I should know, but I can't find it now. The definition of an SRO as far as size, number of units, or the window there?
Sorry, what was the question?
How many units under a SRO definition? Is there a limit to maximum number of units in one building?
No, we just, we're recommending provisions that would set a minimum unit size and a maximum occupancy, so it'd be like 1 to 2 people per unit. And then there are minimum unit sizes.
But there's nothing as far as unit numbers within a one development?
No, there'd be no like density limitation.
And that would be subject to the other zoning, correct?
Yes, but all of the zones we're proposing to permit them in have no density limitations.
Okay. So that was one of my questions was, it makes some sense what you're talking about when you look at the map and the areas we're talking about, specifically major corridors that are existing. The issue that the question I had came up about residential zones that are now going to be included in this. It's strange to me to look at sort of the zones in Poplar Grove and mostly Poplar Grove actually at this point. There's 4 or 5, you can sort of look at them, that are residential. in the heart of the residential areas, but there doesn't, other than sort of east central city, there's nothing else in the city. Is that what you're talking to as far as we have a lot of other issues to sort of deal with?
Yeah, so I think you're referring mainly to the RMU 35 and 45 zones,
Yeah.
which occupy such a small percentage of land in the city. I think a lot of what our plans talk about, and I think a lot of what we talk about as planners in our office, is that we have some very auto-centric zoning districts in the city that we'd like to start replacing with some of these other zones like the RMU 35 and 45. The CB zone, I think, works pretty well with the changes that were made a few years ago. And then the form-based zones to address some of the other heavier, more intense districts like the CG zone. I think we would love to be able to have the work capacity to be able to start making those changes because we do think they're a critical part of helping the city achieve goals, reduce the dependency on the car, improve air quality, improve equitability and economic development and our sustainability all in one. I don't know that as a city we've really looked at land use in that light before, but I think we need to start.
Yeah, I mean, Mr. Chair, the only issue, I think it is a pressing issue. I think that Pamela is correct in saying that there's a certain type of housing we just don't have that would really help in a lot of ways. It's smaller sized, it's easier to build in some ways because of the cost, those kind of things. The only issue here is that potentially you may see it going in certain residential areas and not other residential areas. And at some point, it may end up being a major issue if you look at the city. There's nothing south of 4 South, essentially, for residential zones. It's all 4 South to North Temple, east of downtown. Or there's some pockets in Poplar Grove. So I think it's going to be important for us to follow up on this at some point sooner than later, or figure out how we give more resources to planning to be able to tackle this. Otherwise, we're going to have this on the books for who knows how long, and we may see it still be unequitable in some ways and struggle with this.
Okay, so I hear that council members are comfortable moving forward in this with the bigger picture coming at a later date to discuss.
And we will update the ordinance as we discussed and send it through
Over
as
to
quickly
council.
as we can.
Great.
So,
Thank you. And you have a lot of stuff to do. You're welcome. Okay, on to item number 5. This is all informational. It's the 2020 census update. And Haley Leak is here to, I believe, discuss who is also the census coordinator.
Thank you.
How are you, Haley?
Hi, good. Happy
You've got
to
some
be
great
here.
stuff for us.
Thank you. Yes, hello, Council. I'm Haley Leak. I'm the Census Coordinator for the city. I'm really excited to be here. I'm here to talk about what we've been working on for the last couple of months. SLC Counts is the city's census efforts, and it's also our marketing campaign. Our goal is to achieve a complete and accurate count through collaborative partnerships and supporting communities and organizations with their own census efforts. Local government is one of the most trusted branches of government currently, and so we play a really active role in encouraging participation and engaging the community. The census is right around the corner. Online and paper surveys will be available come March 12th, 2020, and phone responses will also be available during that time. April 1st is Census Day, and this is the day that your answer should reflect. So where you live on April 1st, who's living in your household, how many kids. Even though the census comes out before April 1st, this is the day they're asking you to count your family and where you live. April through May is reminder period, so if you haven't actually completed the census online, you'll get a postcard in the mail to remind you to do it, and you'll also get a paper survey. May through July is called the non-response follow-up operation, And this is where the groundwork begins. So this is where enumerators or census takers will start going door to door to collect responses. This is the most expensive aspect of the census, and it is also, data collected from this window is also not as accurate. Like for instance, let's say a census taker comes to an apartment and asks you how many people live in your household, and some families aren't going to give up that they might have 10 people there when the lease says 2. So our goal is to really encourage participation before May. There are some really fun and unique challenges facing the census, given the political climate that we're in, and also this is the first online census. All these challenges could result in millions of people being undercounted and not represented for the next 10 years. So it's really important that we recognize all these challenges and address them. Misinformation and cybersecurity remain the Census Bureau's biggest concern leading into 2020. They expect that similar interference that we saw in the 2016 election will also happen with the census. And since this is the first online census, cybersecurity is a big concern. 80% of the United States population will be completing the census online, and in Salt Lake City, that means 160,000 residents will be logging online to put very personal information. So we do have to play a really active role in letting our Salt Lake City residents know how to protect their information and recognize scams. For instance, the Census Bureau will never ask you for a social security number, a bank account, or donations. So that's really important information that we have to constantly share. The Census Bureau is also experiencing budget shortfalls. This is one of the most underfunded census in the last 30 or 30 years. So that has resulted in online system tests being neglected. So another fear is that come March 12th, we'll have a similar experience that the Affordable Care Act experienced of the website crashing. We honestly just don't know because there wasn't enough testing done. Hiring is also a big issue for the census. Right now in Salt Lake County alone, they're trying to hire 4,000 temporary employees in a really good economy. These temporary employees are really important for reaching hard-to-count populations because they are the ones going door to door and getting responses. So if we can't hire, if the Census Bureau cannot hire enough people, that could also result in an undercount. And finally, we have to address the environment of fear in which the census is taking place. Attempting to add a citizenship question to suppress Hispanic and immigrant populations from participating is a huge issue. Even though the question is not on the census, the fear still exists. It's really hard because the Bureau right now is saying that that question has not intimidated or affected anyone, but a lot of research has been done that says it has, and it will affect responses. So we do have to be upfront and address that head on, that it is not on this census. So the Census Bureau is working closely with tech companies and marketing firms to address this misinformation, but Salt Lake City also has to join that fight and make sure that we're working alongside the Bureau. So Salt Lake SLC Counts is going to focus on reaching the following hard-to-count populations, specifically reaching the west side of Salt Lake City and Central City. The majority of the west side of Salt Lake City was undercounted in the 2010 census, so our efforts will really focus on reaching them. Every person not counted in this year's census is a loss of $1,086 per person. So over 10 years, that's $10,860. $10,860 Salt Lake City could use to repair roads, build schools, and develop new hospitals. So how we identify where these hard-to-count populations live is through looking at census tracts. A census tract is equivalent to a neighborhood. The Census Bureau creates these tracts to analyze population. There's around 2,500 to 8,000 people living in each census tract. They are arbitrary, but I had the County Surveys Office put hard-to-count census tracts in city council districts, so it'd be easier to identify. And Salt Lake City right now has 13 hard-to-count census tracts that we have to focus on. So tract 1021 in City Council District 4 is one of the hardest to count in Salt Lake City and one of the hardest tracts to count in the nation. This tract is located between South Temple and 400 South to 400 East and 200 East. In 2010, only 59.3% of the tract's household mailed back their census. So 40.7% did not participate and they did not get counted. Factors that contribute to this is there's a lot of apartment buildings mixed in with businesses, but also lack of internet access. And this is why they're projected to be undercounted in the 2020 census. According to the latest American Community Survey, 24.8% of this tract's household has no access to internet and have dial-up only, while 5.5% of these households only have a cellular data plan, and it might be costly to use their plan for non-essential services like the census. So yeah, this is our primary goal, to really address these tracts and look at them. There is a silver lining. Because this is the first online census, these tracts will be updated once responses start coming in. So we'll be able to mobilize this information and target outreach to these areas come mid-March. So that is, besides the doom and gloom, this is the good news of moving the census online. Let's see. Yeah, so our action plan is going to focus on the following strategies. We really have to empower community members to participate, and that really means how we talk about the census and leveraging trusted voices. We plan on hosting town halls and be present at community events and in community spaces. We also, again, have to address that fear and make clear that personal information cannot be used against you. Landlords can't have access to the information. Government agencies, and especially immigration and custom enforcement cannot have that information. We also have to be ready for rapid response campaigns. So if there is misinformation that's out there, we have to get in front of it and make sure accurate information is shared. We also need to keep residents updated on activities that are happening in their neighborhood. So if a census taker is coming to your door, communities need to know about that. They need to know how to identify a census worker. There's also online resources that people can use to type in a census worker's name to check that they actually work for the Bureau. So that's another really important resource we have to let the community know about. And we also have to address the digital divide. It is really important that non-English and Spanish speakers have the ability to access the census online, because that's where 14 other languages are available for them to complete the census. So even if you get a paper application, we should still promote the ability to complete the census online. So to accomplish everything we need to, it has to be a citywide effort. We do have to work across the sectors with schools, businesses, city departments, religious and nonprofit organizations to get the word out, encourage participation, and share safe information. We've already have a lot of great partnerships established. For instance, we're working with the Consumer Protection Initiative to create flyers and recognizing census fraud and how to avoid scams. And these partnerships keep developing every day. Salt Lake City also has our own complete count committee, like the state and the county. The committee is also helping with our census efforts. Committee members are made up of local members that speak the language of their communities and know how to respond to fears and issues around the census. For instance, the Dream Center, the director of the Dream Center is on the committee, and the Dream Center is a key tool to reaching undocumented DACA community members. Anything that really comes from the Dream Center is really trusted in those communities, so we're really fortunate to have that center on the director of the center on our committee and supporting our efforts. So Alonso Reyna Rivarola, he's the first person we are highlighting on our marketing campaign. He is the director of the Dream Center. But our marketing campaign is really a result of months of research looking at like effective messaging in hard-to-count communities like the Pacific Islander, Asian American, or the Latinx community. From focus groups that have been done and other research, there's two really key messages that resonate with these undercounted communities. One is focusing on resources, so how the census data and funding supports schools, supports school lunch and affordable housing. And another powerful message is civic and community engagement and duty. So completing the census is a way for standing up for your community. It's a way to make sure you're represented. Even for undocumented community members, it's a way for them to have a say in, I'm here and I should be counted. So really pulling off those two messages that's what our marketing and messaging strategy is focusing on.
Haley, can you talk to us about how you market, particularly to the demographics that have low internet connectivity and we're having difficulty reaching anyway? So how do you reach them?
Yeah, so that's going to be a huge effort on like our partners. So if they're working with any caseworkers or going to like community clinics, making sure that really just dropping off right now for the reminder phase is dropping off flyers and saying this census is coming up. One thing is what we really have to do, and as a city-wide effort, is like department heads, especially if they have boots on the ground employees, need to be able to, and I'm creating a training to talk about the census. So anyone who works with community members should be able to talk about it and answer questions and provide that reminder. So it's getting these posters in community spaces, but also making sure that we have like bullet points. And, it's coming, it's a grassroots, but also it's, top down, that everyone's being able to talk about it. And this is something we're really going to kick off in January, is getting these posters out in the community and then really just like going to people and be like, okay, so providers, you work with this population. And again, it is looking at the census tract maps and being able to make sure around those spaces that we are doing like outreach events, we're holding community town halls. Did that answer your question?
Yes, generally enough, yeah.
Councilmember Johnston.
Thank you very much for this. Couple of questions. How much information are you going to have from the Census Bureau about census tracts or even households that have not responded?
Yes.
What's the level of granularity you're going to have in that feedback?
So it's all public knowledge. So there's two websites that this information will be available. So Hard to Count, 2020, and then through the Census Bureau, it's called Roam. So the Census Bureau will be updating those. And we also work in collaboration with the Census Bureau. So I currently work with two partnership specialists, and they provide a lot of helpful information too. And fortunately, Salt Lake City is a huge priority of them. So we are kind of collaborating to look at these maps, but it is available online.
Okay. I guess I'll have some more questions in a second, so we'll continue on.
Councilmember Valdemoros.
I have a question, and I'm not sure if this is possible, but we do have about 28 consulates in Salt Lake, Salt Lake County. Could they be a partner for you guys to reach out those communities that potentially?
Yes, 100%. And that is my call to action, which I'm kind of building to. I don't know if I'm doing a good job at it, but it is that these resources that I might not know of, but it is engaging your networks. So we will, on our website, have all these resources available, like talking points, PowerPoints, these posters. So it is engaging that network and being like, what does your census effort look like? Here are these, make sure you're talking about it. And it can't just be like a one-time thing too. We do have to make sure this is like, at least through January, through the summer, that it's a constant reminder and really pressuring, being like, this needs to be a key focus and issue for so many community and consulates as well. I know like some of the consulates are on the state complete count committee, And so this is also what our complete count committee looks like, and what our strategy reflects is what the state's not doing and what the county's not doing. And then also what the Census Bureau is not doing. So we are trying to divide and conquer in that sense.
Oh, awesome. And IRC, I'm assuming that you're reaching out, and then churches?
Yeah, so word on the street is the Census Bureau is working really closely with the LDS Church too, but there's supposed to be an announcement at General Conference to complete the census, but it is especially for the Hispanic and Latinx community, working with like a lot of the Catholic churches, and that's another focus for our complete count committee, to reach out to those trusted local leaders.
Thank you.
So with our marketing and messaging strategy, that is also another really key point of what our Complete Count Committee does focus on. Our committee members were really selected on how wide of a network that they do have. So that's really important part. We also are making sure that all our marketing is in Spanish. It'd be great to have other languages, because I think last time I talked to Salt Lake District, there's like 80 languages spoken in Salt Lake City. So getting our materials translated in as many languages as possible. One of the things that I've really have adopted with this census effort is realizing how important community engagement is. If someone sees a census poster, they might not necessarily understand the impact, or it just might be something they look at and leave. So it's really important that we do engage the community through these town halls, and we have a lot coming up before the year ends. And these are really great ways for community members to craft their own messages about the census and focus on what they want to talk about, because what I might want to talk about to the Latinx community would be different than what a trusted leader would. So we are providing the resources to host their own town halls, but also letting a lot of communities lead the effort on that. And so we do have our website up. It's slc.gov/census, and we have it translated in Spanish as well. And we also have an email that community members can use to reach out to say, hey, I noticed this, I'm a little confused, or if they want to schedule a town hall. We just got our posters done last week, so I'm really trying to think about how to get the word out there. And that's what our next Complete Count Committee is going to focus on. So if you want to attend that in December, that'd be awesome. But yeah, to conclude, the census is political empowerment because everyone counts equally, regardless of immigration status, age, race, income, ability, or gender. And I think that's really important that we have to convey to the community. And we also have to let them know how to be safe when completing the census and avoiding scams. And that is where City Council really does come and play an active role, is engaging their networks on a consistent basis, be trusted leaders and sharing that message, and really making sure that, like, if anything's overlooked, to make sure we're addressing it. 2020 is an incredible opportunity to see what our city looks like after 10 years. And so we do have to make sure that we're using all our resources to count everybody. Yeah, I really thank you for this opportunity to present. I really thank you. Back to our Complete Count Committee, we do have staff from the City Council participating, and it's been really like a great opportunity to learn about a lot of programs I wasn't aware of, so it's great to have that support. We also have members from CAN on the committee, so it is really folding in a lot of city employees to what we're working on as it is. And let's see. Our other huge partners in this effort is the state's Complete Count Committee, the county, and the Census Bureau. But yeah, thank you for this opportunity. I'm happy to answer any more questions.
Thank you. And I think Councilmember Johnston has a few.
Please. I'm not going to look at Jen because she's making faces at me. Thank you for this. I think as we get closer to it, I know the website's kind of broad right now because it doesn't have details on it. As we get closer, I'd love to see a breakdown a little more of the Census Bureau responsibilities and their activities, the county, the state county, and then the city and what gaps we're feeling specifically. That'd be helpful for me.
Really good feedback.
The second piece was transition from the current administration to the next administration. Right now it's organized under Dr. Seelig, correct? How does this look going forward to January, I guess? Do we have a sense of that right now? I mean, it sort of lies on you, it sounds like. So if anything happens to you, we're in
That
trouble?
again? I'm sorry, say that again?
So if anything happens to you, we're in trouble because everything is in your head at this point?
Oh, that's a discussion we still need to have. And
Okay.
I am trying to make sure that there's, whatever does happen, there's like things in place where it's not going to like come crashing down, but like the resources that we have established is a good jumping off point either way, like the website and the marketing and the research behind it. But yeah, that's why I haven't scheduled any. I've scheduled maybe like 3 town halls past January, but then that I'm holding off.
Okay. I would love as much detailed information as possible, specifically about how do we reassure folks who are nervous about this that they're safe, or can we, I guess? The details of it, the details of what questions are answered, as much as we possibly can about where the information goes and how it's processed. Anything we can get to help this. The second thing I'm wondering, as a council member, I'd love to see as much information as possible as well to use anything we're doing. We may have to do this 6-7 times kind of thing to get the message out there, both through monthly newsletters, email updates, whatever else I can do as a council member. Third piece is aging population.
The aging population?
Yeah, folks over the age of, I won't put an age.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about people who don't have generally a lot of internet access sometimes, who may not go out as much to public spaces that we're going to post stuff in, and what's the specific outreach to their needs as far as details such as the size of letters and font on manuals or printed out brochures. Details like that would be helpful to know as well.
Yeah.
So I can help out as much as possible.
And a thing I've really learned too through my couple months on the job is that like it does have to be flexible too, because I was doing a tabling event and I had an elderly woman come up to me and she's like, I said, it's the first online census. And she's like, oh, I'm not going to do it online. I want to make sure someone's employed in the city and they have that job and I want to talk with them. I'm like, that's great. That's fair, So it is that's the tricky thing. Every population has like this preference and what they want. So that is really good feedback. And especially, so as a city, and this is something too that we do have to share too, is that we aren't conducting the census. And that confuses a lot of people too, because we don't count people in group quarters. So like the prison, homeless shelter, and some nursing homes, that is up to the Census Bureau. And also as like making sure that all our community support that are helping folks with the census, since they don't have the Title 13 oath, they shouldn't be anywhere near the census, like the actual survey and the question, like the information on it. So that's also making sure that like our partners understand where to draw the line to support.
The last question is not your question necessarily, the Census Bureau, but I know they're looking for a lot of employees, temporary and seasonal employees, so to speak.
Yes.
They've come to community councils. I've seen them there and other places. It may be helpful for us to get that out to our communities as well for an employment opportunity. Folks who may not normally join this, who may be interested in helping out and getting a second job.
Yes, 100%. That's very helpful to be able to like talk about it too. And another important thing too with these talking points too is that the Census Bureau, and I always tell this when I'm out in community events, is that they're very backed up with their background checks. So people who have been applying might not hear back until January. And that's an important thing too, because people get discouraged and So just having that understanding. But yeah, so we will have resources on our website, like packets of like talking points and all this stuff. And that's really great feedback to where we can start developing more of that. So I appreciate that feedback.
What point do you think the website will be updated with that information? How soon do you think it'll be updated, the website, the city website?
It really depends on the mayor's marketing team.
Okay.
They have all the information, and so I'm chugging along with that. So I wanted it last week, but we're getting there, and we finally hit our benchmark of having all these materials set in place. So we're ready to run with it.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Valdemoros.
Thank you so much. As I'm thinking how we market this and how we can help, and I'm not sure if you're going to do TV advertising or Facebook, sponsored Facebook ads. I'm sure you're thinking about it, but if you're going to do SLC TV, feel free. Maybe this is an offline thing, but I'm offering me talking about the Census Bureau in Spanish, if you'd like, so that we can publish that as well, so that the folks that do speak Spanish feel like, this is possible, and all the information that we have in English that might not be so clear in Spanish, I can do that.
That is so helpful, and that's exactly what we're looking for too, especially like we really do have to pick up a lot of slack where like the state has left off and the county, or not the county, or the state and the Census Bureau, because our message does have, for it to be meaningful, impactful, it does need to be local. Like when people hear Salt Lake City complete the census, it's going to be more than like, a national Census Bureau advertising. So that's a really, again, very good connection. So with all these feedback, please email the Census 2020 at SLC email, and like this is great feedback too, because we have only been meeting with our complete count committee twice, and we have to look at the budget, that looks like in the new administration and all that kind of stuff. So I think we'll have a lot more clarity in January. Thank you.
Great. The only thing I have to add is I love all your community partners, but I didn't see Salt Lake City School District.
They haven't 100% confirmed yet, so I left them off.
Okay.
But yeah, I have met with them a couple times, and they're waiting to actually hear back if they get the state grant to really support some of the things we want to do.
Okay.
And that's another hard thing. A lot of community organizations are on hold until they hear if they have funding from the state to really do what they want to do. That's the same thing with our partnership with the West Side Coalition and how many town halls that we'd like to hold. It's if there's funding.
Any idea when the state's going to come out and release that?
The grant was due 2 weeks ago. They said that people should know by the end of the month.
Okay.
And it's supposed to be awarded by December as well.
Dr. Seelig.
Thank you, Councilmember Rogers. I just wanted to add additional information. Thank you for your question related to the school district. And thank you, Haley, for answering in a wonderful way. I just have additional information. The school district actually reached out to us through the superintendent's office some months ago, and we assisted in facilitating a connection between the governor's census committee and the school district, so helped bring them on board to that group. The superintendent at that time expressed strong interest in partnering with the city of Salt Lake and being able to help with outreach. So that intent has been stated, and we've been working really hard to include them. I guess the rest of the story is whatever formal processes they must go through to officially be a partner. But we have engaged with them and helped them too.
I knew you had. I just hadn't heard the story behind it, so that's great information. So thank you.
Thank you for the question.
Yes, thank you. Without any other questions, we're going to move on. Thank you so much for your presentation.
Thank you so much.
Yep. We are going to take a quick 5-minute break, if that's okay. We will be right back. Don't leave anywhere. Council members can leave, but no one else presenting can leave. We're going to listen, I guess, to the public benefits analysis of the Magnolia project at 165 South, 300 East.
Hi, Mr. Chair. In fact, we have structured this slightly different. We are going to hear from that, and we're going to hear from that first. But in the same public hearing, in the
items
same
6 and 7.
briefing, yes,
Okay.
we're going to hear both items. There were two separate transmittals from the administration, but we combined them in one because they are essentially about the same property.
Correct.
So I'm just going to give a little bit of brief background information and then let the administration folks who know the details take it away. Thanks. So, as you may know, the administration has negotiated some new agreements with the developers of the Northwest Pipeline building, AKA the old public safety building. After these developments, essentially the contracts that the council approved in 2018 were allowed to expire. So they're going to talk a lot about this. Today, we're only talking about the Magnolia section. This is a 3-component housing project that includes mixed income and market rate housing. The Magnolia is designed to be permanent supportive housing, and for that reason, it has some special priority and some special nuances that you'll hear more about later.
And to be a little bit more specific, it's the old public safety building, the old baby blue building.
That will be, my understanding is that will be the market rate housing.
And then behind it will be the...
Exactly.
Great.
The original property for that building is about 2.8 acres, and the Magnolia is about 0.36 acres, if I remember correctly. The bottom line is the Magnolia building is going to be built to the same specifications that were originally planned, the ones that the council initially approved in 2018. The difference is in some details, including the structure of ownership of the land. This land will actually remain with the city. It'll be under city ownership and offered in a long-term lease to Shelter the Homeless, which will run the building, the services and the building. The other component of this is a request by the developers, which is Cowboy Partners, for a $1.5 million housing trust fund loan. This is half again as much as their previous loan, and they cite the increase in construction costs as a reason for increasing that loan amount. Finally, I just want to add the goal of this work session is for the council to review the proposed lease rate, the term, and the public benefits of the Magnolia property, and then also review the associated terms with the proposed new housing trust loan. The item schedule is we're briefing it today, public hearing on December 3rd. The public hearing is required because there is a new informal public benefits analysis, and I'm sure all of you have additional information that you can provide on that if needed. And then the council is scheduled potentially to take action on December 3rd, or it could take action on December 10th if you'd rather. I also want to mention that in the audience today and available to respond to questions should council members have them are Lee Dial, who is part of the Cowboy Partners group, and Preston Cochran, whom you probably know as Shelter the Homeless Executive Director. There are a number of policy questions at the end of the staff report. I'm happy to go through them now or later, or not at all, depending on the council's
Why don't we hear from the
preference.
administration, and then we'll jump into the policy questions.
Sounds good, thanks.
All right, so this property is located, we alluded to, Lot 1 of a proposed subdivision known as Violin School Commons. Lot 1 is north of the Public Safety Building on 300 East. And it will consist of 65 units and 5 floors. The project has 1,200 square feet of enterprise space and services and programs and support built into that on the ground floor. As far as the public benefits go, for the 99-year ground lease, which will have a restriction on it for the term of that lease, it's pretty straightforward. I mean, this development utilizes unused surface parking behind that building for the benefit of the most vulnerable populations and provides these resources and services all in one place. So this is significantly different than the original deal. The initial deal is proposed to be a $3.7 million seller's note for the overall property, $2 million in housing trust fund loans. This proposal today is simply looking at just Lot 1 as Phase 1. The second phase and the remainder of the property will be negotiated separately and is being negotiated currently. So we've got a $710,000 value for this property, and we're offering a lease for that. So if approved, the land purchase would be required. The reduced debt and the debt service obligation will directly benefit Shelter the Homeless and its tenants through the increased cash flow that will be used for services, thus reducing the need for fundraising, et cetera. So if you have any questions on this ground lease, we'd be happy to answer those, or we can turn it over to Bailey for the Housing Trust Fund loan.
Any questions in regards to this so far? Doesn't look like it. All right, Bailey.
Awesome. Okay.
Wait, we've got 1, 2, 3.
Sorry.
All right, looks like we got a whole bunch of questions now. You're off the hook, Bailey.
Awesome.
Well, maybe you'll answer it, Bailey. I don't know. I wanted you to contextualize this ground lease, this community land trust opportunity. If I'm wrong in calling it a community land trust opportunity, correct me, but that seems like what we're getting at here, where we own the land, we lease it, it guarantees affordability in perpetuity, essentially. Is this the first one we've done?
I don't believe it'll technically be in the community land trust.
Why not?
That's a question for Hand, I think. On the capital asset side, we've looked at this as just simply a ground lease with the deed restriction tied to that for the 99 years.
I'd like to know why it's not in the community land trust, which I know you don't have an answer to. But if someone here does.
It might be we just didn't get that far at this point.
At least try to answer it. I really don't want to stand here, but I will. Council. Oh my gosh, and I throw my papers to the ground. So a community land trust, the way we've set it up so far is for a single family or small multifamily home or homes to be on land that the city maintains ownership. So that's a similarity. But in this regard, the ground lease is for a lot larger and a permanent supportive housing that folks will not be paying for a mortgage. Those residents would be, correct me if I'm wrong, they would be living there without the need to have that payment.
Well, because it's all subsidized.
Correct.
Vouchers.
So a community land trust, as we've structured it here in Salt Lake, is for ownership of those properties.
Not what I understand.
Does that help?
I think I know what you're asking, and I think that it would not be a significant leap to have that conversation and to just raise that as a policy issue and work with the Hand people on pros and cons and come back.
Yeah, thanks.
So we're going to go to Councilmember Valdemoros and then to Councilmember Johnston.
So just sort of clarification and for my mind to understand this better. Initial project was 3 housing developments. Good. So the Magnolia, which is a permanent supportive housing, then the Metropolitan Market Rate, and then Liberty, it's mixed income housing. Then the request, how much was the request for? Was it for the 3 projects or just one project?
Just the one.
Just the one for the Magnolia. And that was, the request was for $1 million.
1.5 for the Housing Trust Fund loan, and then a long-term ground lease
Okay.
for the property.
And now they're requesting something differently.
That's the current request.
That's the current request, and then the previous request, Liberty Uptown, was
City Council approved a loan for Liberty Uptown for $1 million in late 2017 and approved a loan in December of 2018 to the Magnolia through the Housing Trust Fund. So in total, there was $2 million through the Housing Trust Fund allocated to the 3 total projects.
Okay, $2 million. That was originally, and now we're looking at how much?
1.5 just for the Magnolia and no loan to the Liberty Uptown.
Okay, all right. Thanks.
Mr. Chair, may I go? Thank you, sir.
Oh, I'm sorry,
It's okay.
No, I needed to look at you in order to go. I thought I already made that
I think you're
clear.
daydreaming. So the question goes back to Councilmember Mendenhall's inquiry about where does this live then going forward? If it's not in the Community Land Trust, how do we catalog it? How do we track it? How do we know it's there? Give me a sense of that, do you think?
So it would definitely just be vested in the Salt Lake City Corporation, and it would just be a part of our ongoing inventory. And then we would just keep track of the lease over time to make sure that it's properly managed. But where it's, a nominal amount, collecting the $12 a year, make sure that that gets, handled. But yeah, it would just be in our normal inventory and remain as one of our assets.
Okay. I guess I would advocate then have a discussion so it's clear going forward for everybody. We now have an inventory. We have lists, right? Which is a great step and took a lot of work on your part, so thank you. Going forward, how do we simplify it enough so we have a very clear picture at any one point in time of our housing assets, for instance, our usable commercial assets, perhaps, our strange parcels we don't know what to do with assets.
Yes.
Those kind of things.
Yes.
That's what I'm trying to figure out. How do we keep this from just getting lost somewhere in there in the future administration and we discover it one day again, or where was it at?
That's currently in the works. We were on that project right now, and there will be an online platform that city staff can go in and update. We can track. We can sort. The database is built. There's just some kinks to work out.
And we want to be able to categorize everything, to their highest and best use. So we can go in and we can look at those properties that are irregular, the kind of the odd ones that we're not sure about what to do with, and then the ones like this where they are encumbered and we know what they're encumbered with and for how long, and it'll be organized in that way so that they don't fall through the cracks.
Just to offer some additional information, one of the main responsibilities of JP's position as capital asset manager is to do just that, honestly, is to make sure that not only do we have accurate, up-to-date records of our city assets, but also that we're thinking and planning strategically and proactively with regard to those assets, categorizing them, looking at our needs and how our needs align with what we already own, how we can make sure that we protect certain assets for certain future needs, those kinds of things. And really, it just comes down to time. JP is working on it. He's chipping away at it. He's gotten further than anyone has gotten thus far, and he's very close. We just have a few little kinks we want to work out to make sure that we have accurate information.
Okay.
But that's exactly what we're working towards.
How would it interact with the Community Land Trust or other housing kind of lists we have as a city?
In terms of the Community Land Trust, we haven't yet contemplated a non-for-sale product in the land trust. We could look into that. I don't know if there's a model for that anywhere in the country. I don't think there is. That's not how community land trusts work, but it doesn't mean that's not something we could explore and see if this makes sense for that product.
Sure. I think I'm coming at it also from a housing perspective, not just an asset perspective, but a housing perspective. How do we have a quick way to look at all of the city investment into housing particularly without having to go to multiple lists? Or if we do, is there a way to simplify it down so we could do that easily?
I think what we're working towards is one list that has our property categorized such that we would be able to identify that very quickly, run reports, and that as things change, that we can quickly and easily update that and keep track of that in real time.
Okay, thank you.
More questions? Yes?
I apologize, maybe for the recorder, we should identify the people at the table. I apologize that we failed to do that earlier.
Yes, why don't we do that?
You want to
Mr.
start?
Goetz, why don't we start with you and go down the table to Bailey?
JP Goetz, Capital Asset Manager.
Bailey White, real property agent formerly with Hand.
Dan Rip, Neighborhood Development Manager.
Jennifer McGrath, Deputy Director of Community and Neighborhoods.
Great. So any other questions? Did you have anything else you wanted to add before I have a couple questions?
I have one more question.
Great. Okay, well, let's keep on going then.
On the key project changes slide, if we could go there, the last one on the current that mentions the one-year option for the developer to purchase the remaining. Can you give us any, obviously that's a negotiation that's probably in flux right now. It's a dramatically different proposal than we had initially. Can you talk to us about maybe really broadly the two potential outcomes? Let's say that they choose not to exercise that option. I think 1 year is probably standard, but I'm also wondering about the, if you perceive any potential difficulty in selling that property to a different developer if they don't exercise it, with it being adjacent to a permanent supportive housing project. And what kind of obstacles do you see between here and there?
I can take a crack at it just off the bat. I think we've had, second and third position developers from the RFP that have been calling and asking. So there's a lot of interest in the property. I don't know if there's much of a perception of any issues with the permanent supportive housing that we've heard from them. But moving forward, the option, we have proposed terms that we've given to the developer, and I think we're pretty set in those. The one-year option has a 2% fee associated with that, and if they don't move forward, I think we're covering ourselves with that, and there's a lot of interest.
And it's really a deal that I think you'll find is more standard market rate than what we saw before. That's our goal.
Councilmember Johnston.
Quick question about the services component. It looks like the deferred developer fees for $930,000 or so, is that to contribute towards service dollars? Do we know?
No, that funding doesn't go towards
Okay.
the supportive services. The supportive services, there'll be, there's a set amount set aside at the beginning of the development as a reserve that the road home, when they're operating, they can tap into
How
if
much
they're
is
running
that?
low. I want to say it was like 60,000. It was somewhere between like 60 to 200,000. I'd have to go back and double
Okay.
check.
One-time money is used to draw on, but they're supposed to be fundraising for that.
Yes.
For their end. What's the contract going to look like for their services piece, do you think? Do we have a sense of that? I guess it's a shelter of the homeless question, most likely.
Yeah.
We're looking it up right now.
Okay. The reason I bring that up is because the permanent supportive housing is dependent on services, and if services are not provided or funded, even if they are, it may be the city's providing the funding for that through another RFP process or a CDBG or those kind of emergency services funds. So it may not be that we're just funding this. We may be in it sort of on a second hand funding the services piece as well going forward. So just I need to be aware of that piece as well. I'm just not sure.
Yeah, that was going to be my question too, is to follow up. I understand that the road home needs to raise roughly $200,000 annually. What happens if they are short on that amount?
Yeah, so to answer your question on the services, so we've allocated $250,000 annually for services, which the road home would use from both rents, similar to what we do at Palmer Court and Wendell Apartments. And then could you repeat your second question?
We have a sense of how much that would be per annually for rents, the contribution to services?
You have that there.
Preston, you should introduce yourself too.
Preston Cochran, Executive Director of Shelter of the Homeless. Thank you. So they've got For the studio, the voucher rent would be $708. And so the annual would be $552,240.
That's the total.
The annual gross potential income from those rents.
Okay. Minus any overhead. Is there any other overhead we should be aware of?
Not that I can see on this, no.
What's the length of the contract, do you think, for services?
The length of it?
Yeah, what length do you think?
Typically, we'd go 3 to 5 years initially, similar to what we've done, and then year to year after that.
Okay. I mean, the question was, if they can't fundraise whatever the gap is, what happens then?
Yeah, if they couldn't fundraise that amount,
Or they couldn't provide it somehow, what would happen?
The gap in funding that they're looking at.
yeah, if they couldn't lease up all of the units, for example, and couldn't do that, then they'd have to look at alternative fundraising opportunities.
So the question is, if they can't pay for the services in a year, what happens?
No, I mean, if the road home couldn't,
Yeah, as the service operator.
yeah, if they weren't able to, we would likely have to either have an RFP for a new provider that would be able to do that.
Okay. I mean, the second question is probably a road home question, but a lot of times they apply to the city for service money, operations money for different programs. Is that one of the ideas for this as well, or?
I'm not sure what the road home has in mind as far as applying for CDBG funds or other funds related to it.
Okay.
I know that they apply for funds for Palmer Court, primarily for staff and some of the different services and programs that happen there.
Okay.
Great. Any other questions? Cindy Gus-Jensen.
I just wonder, maybe the Councilmember Johnston's question could be directed to the attorney's office to see what contractually the city will be saying about the service level provided and what happens if that provider is unable to provide services. Would that be of help? Are you that far along in this work that you could address that?
Hi, Kimberly Chitris with the City Attorney's Office. I think what you're asking is how would the city enforce the provision of supportive services? So it wouldn't be our services contract, but we do have a restrictive use agreement that would be recorded against the property for the entire length of the ground lease that would require them to operate the property as a permanent supportive housing facility. So if they weren't able to provide the services, then it wouldn't be a permanent supportive housing facility. They'd be in violation of their ground lease, and the property would come back to the city. Does that answer your question?
Probably we come back to the city, meaning that we need to start thinking about operating it?
No, the
or
property would.
Okay.
So the city owns the ground, and Shelter the Homeless will own the building.
Okay.
If they no longer have a ground lease, the building reverts to ownership of the city. So then the city would decide what to do with that.
So let's say it's halfway used. There's no money for the services. They're in violation of their contract. Then it falls back to us to figure out what we're going to do with the 30 units that are being used, and try to figure out how we fund the services, the continued services for the 30 potential
Well, it wouldn't be
clients.
automatic, so the city
Okay.
would have to take some action to enforce that and to terminate the ground lease and take back the building. So at that time, I think you'd probably make that evaluation. But yes, so if the ground lease runs its course, so at the end of the 99 years, the city gets ownership of the improvements at that time. So if the ground lease is terminated by the city anytime, then that would be a remedy of the city. I mean, I would also say there's probably a lot of negotiation opportunities along that path, but that would be the city's ultimate recourse.
And just to follow up to Councilmember Valdemaros's question, we are in the fourth position, is that correct? So in essence, there are 3 other entities that would be ahead of us if, and I know we're playing what if scenarios, but we would be in the 4th position in order to try and.
So there's 2 things happening. Remember, ground lease is different than the Housing Trust Fund loan. So the Housing Trust Fund loan is in 4th position behind the Zions Bank loan. 2 Olene Walker loans, housing loan funds loans that are not due until maturity. So there's no payments on those during their term of the loan. And then the Housing Trust Fund loan is 4th.
Mr. Chair, so Kimberly, if we, and I like, forgive us applicants, it's our job, but also I think James and I were on the council and we went through something painful on State Street. And so if that were to happen, the 16.2 million minus what we're talking about contributing from the city at this point, would we be, we would be paying off those loans? They would be paying back the lenders to the extent possible, but who ends up in taking back the land and thus the building that we haven't paid for? Do we end up buying
The
it?
ground lease is senior to all of the lenders. So I'm going to have to double check this.
So it's just the value of the land that's senior to all the other lenders of 16 or 15.2.
Right, and
No, 14.7.
now how does the subordination?
And if we need an executive session,
So like, I don't want to give you the wrong information, just kind of off the cuff.
no, I appreciate that. And I think if we need a closed session because of the legal nature of it, then we'll refer to you for that. But we ended up spending millions of dollars to acquire the State Street property after that fell apart. And we were what, in 3rd or 4th position on that?
So the city is frequently in a very junior position. I don't know that there's any similarities between this and the State Street structure, although I certainly appreciate the sensitivity to what happens if this all falls apart. And I would really like the opportunity, if you don't mind, to do a little bit of thinking about how it would work with the other lenders if we ended up foreclosing on the ground lease, terminating the ground lease, what happens to those loans? Because I'm just afraid of telling you the wrong thing. I think that
I was just going to recommend too that you come back and we discuss it, or absolutely. We are not looking for you.
Feel better
no.
about that, so that I'm giving you like information that I feel comfortable with, because it's complicated. So if you were to foreclose on like your Housing Trust Fund loan, you would take property, the improvements, senior or subject to the senior lenders, right? And I think that's something more like what happened with State Street. But if you're talking about taking back the ground lease, terminating the ground lease, then I have to just go back and figure out what happens to the senior.
And that's
lenders.
fine.
Thank you. I'm sorry.
Councilmember Johnston.
So we'll have another opportunity for these questions to be answered, since the council is not scheduled to take action until December 3rd. So you have a little bit of time to work on this.
I'll put together the technicalities of what happens in all the different variations.
And they're just what ifs, right? But we never thought we would be in a what if scenario, so.
Yeah.
Is that okay? To that point, that's something that we've been dealing with, and I want us to think ahead of all the worst-case scenarios in a way, so that we can work our ways through how to protect these assets that we have and these investments that we have before we have to.
We've talked about these. I wasn't prepared to talk about them today, so that's on me, that I just don't want to give you poor advice at the table.
That's okay. On the 30-year 0% lease, 1.5 million, I believe, is that accurate? It's a loan for 1.5. Sorry, not the lease. The 1.5 million dollar loan, 0% interest for 30 years for the term. What would be the interest rate now, and what would be the total amount we would collect had we done a normal, typical interest rate on this? You have a sense of that?
I don't have that number on me, but the way that the Housing Trust Fund Board recommended structuring the new policies over the discussions that we had from about January to June of this year was at a 2% interest rate, would be the standard, or I'm sorry, a 3% interest rate would be a standard in this project because it meets certain goals that are outlined in Growing SLC. It would be eligible for an interest rate reduction, but that's a number we can easily get you.
Okay. It's not critical to the decision on this. It's helpful to know what our investment would be along with the lease and everything else towards this housing taking shape.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you.
Okay. Is there anything else that you'd like to add? No? Okay, I think we've had our questions answered, and we'll be looking for that information. And we might have you on December 3rd just to come back and present that. So thank you so much. So that marks off items 6 and 7 of our agenda. Go into item 8, which is approval of funds for fiscal year 2019-20, funding our future housing program applications. And we have Allison at the table again, Allison Rowland from council staff, Lonnie Egertsengaff who's the director of HAND, she's here, yes. And is Jennifer Schumann the deputy director here as well? Yes, we are good. Yes.
So, Mr. Chair, maybe as administrative staff gets settled, I can remind the council that this is strictly a discussion of the applications and the redesigned application process for the Funding Our Future housing programs. This is something that the council was involved in during this year's budget discussions, having to do with the holding account that was established while the council learned more about each of these programs that were proposed to take part in this. So I believe Lonnie and Jennifer Schumann, who is deputy director, of HAND, will have all this information for you. There will be an opportunity to talk about the final budget numbers for FY19 for Funding Our Future programs, most likely on December 3rd. So there will be time to discuss those, but we're going to concentrate on this one today so that we can help them meet their deadlines and get all these programs under contract as soon as possible.
And Mr. Chair, I work for one of the applicants, so I may need to excuse myself. I'm not sure. We're not voting on anything today,
Well,
but it may be
hopefully
clear.
we don't have to, right? And we
That's the
can
question.
just go around that information at that point in time.
Sure.
Thank you.
So, Chair, Vice Chair, Acting Chair, thank you for having us, council members. We just wanted to start off really quickly as a quick history of where we've been in the past, 6 or so months. During the budget cycle, we worked on identifying a process that might fit more closely or be kind of reflective of our usual CDBG process or HUD funding process, so that we are able to vet community needs, have community members or partners provide us with applications. In August, we talked about a different kind of process than what we went through on year 1, Funding Our Future. So this is our kind of shortened version of this process. We have gone through a very quick 14-day window for applications to come in from community partners. That was in September. And we received 15 applications. And we had a very careful scoring process in our HAND staff. We have the criteria. We can get into a little more detail of that if you'd like. And we discussed the applications with the mayor and went through a couple of things that she tweaked a little bit, the recommendations that staff had put based on the applications. And so today we're actually looking for you to give us guidance, approval, maybe thumbs up or so on the resolution that would allow us to move forward with this application process so that we can work with our partners to get under contract to utilize the Funding Our Future dollars. We need to do that in December in order for it to move along. So in the coming year, and actually right now, we have the application process open so that we can work through this coming mayor's budget cycle and the budget cycle into May, June of next year, and have time for a board process. So our citizen advisory board would be able to review these, and then we can start kind of
on a 12-month cycle and be able to go forward. So what else did I miss? Okay. I'm going to allow Jennifer, since she's been really closely working with Barb Reynaud, who unfortunately can't be with us today, to work through. You have in your packets or within the transmittal a one-page summary of each of the applications. And then the log is what we have. Oh, what we are trying to have.
It's coming, but it's in the transmittal as well.
Yes. It is a very brief summary of each of the applications and the recommended dollar amount for the request that was provided. So do you want to start on that? Or are there any questions for initially what I've just discussed or other things that in your review of the transmittal you'd like us to answer first?
And then I believe you're just going to be looking at table 1 from the report, correct?
I'm not sure if it's
So
labeled that way.
Going through the log, Exhibit A of the log.
Oh, yes.
In the transmittal itself, there's a table that gives the breakdown of the different funding amounts that council has set aside earlier this year. You can see in that table that there were over $3.2 million worth of requests. And just as a reminder, we have $1,775,000. So like always, there's always more need than the dollars we have available. So we are prepared to go through the log and talk about each application if you would like, just real briefly to go through those and then discuss maybe if you have questions about how the scoring lined up or how the recommendation from the mayor lined up.
That sounds great.
Is that okay?
And may I insert also that Allison has been great to work with us on this and that she is able to, on the fly, I think that's what you said, Allison, be able to insert if there are questions or changes that you'd like to do right now.
So if we could start with number 1, the road home with their shared housing application. This was a request for $120,000 to assist individuals who are interested in sharing housing. This program, at its funding request of $120,000, would serve 50 individuals. Council set aside about $100,000 for this effort earlier this year. So with that, the mayor recommendation is to fund at the $100,000 level.
So I think the question for the council is whether you'd like to follow the mayor's recommendation or recommend some other amount. We could also come back to it later.
So Allison, and maybe you can tell me if this is right. The $100,000 would serve for 50 case management and written assistance. Is that correct?
Actually, that was the original request, so it would be
Less
slightly
the 20,000.
Yes.
Slightly less,
Okay.
right. The funding request is to help with housing navigation and case manager salaries, and then funding assistance for move-in assistance, some light touch rent, some light touch utilities, that sort of thing.
I think, Mr. Chair, it may be difficult to discuss funding allocations with only 4 of us here and me being employed by Volunteers of America, one of them. So just a heads up on this discussion. If another council member is here at some point, it may be easier to have that.
Well, December 3rd, we're going to be hearing this, not hearing it, but we can have it on the agenda again, I think, and fine tune it. But yeah, I wish we had one more council member here so you could.
The discussion's okay, but I think it's going to be hard to have an open discussion about the funding allocation.
That's fine. If we can just continue through and discussing each item, and then maybe by that time, Andrew,
So we
Councilmember
apologize
Johnson.
for our lack of.
Sometimes these things happen.
And we are
So-
getting down to the end of the year, right? And so there's a lot going on. Okay, so if there's no questions on that one, am I okay to move forward to the next?
Yes.
Great. The second application is Road Home House 20. You may be familiar with this one. It is targeting funding and support to the top 20 users of our emergency services system. The council set aside $250,000 was allocated for this purpose. However, $125,000 was released immediately, starting July 1. So this request fills the remainder, $125,000. The Road Home is interested in assisting as many folks as they can through this process. So currently, I think they have 27 folks on the program.
And the original 125 that was released, was that released to the road home as well?
Yes, yeah, that is under contract, and they are spending from that. Number 3, the Housing Authority of Salt Lake City is a landlord assurance and incentive program. You'll see that this program is very similar. We know that the state has a landlord insurance program, but it does have some limitations, and because of those limitations, it's been a little bit difficult for the state to administer those funds. The Housing Authority has come forward with a very similar request, but it has a little bit more flexibility. So rather than targeting just Section 8 or Housing Choice Voucher tenants, it is open to anyone that is below 60% AMI. In addition, they are really focusing an existing program and being able to leverage that. So they have a program and landlord outreach team, and their job is to work with landlords to house hard-to-house clients. Unfortunately, that team has no financial resources available to help incentivize landlords. And so it ends up being a lot of talk and a lot of relationship building, but nothing financially to help support that. So this landlord assurance and incentive program would allow them to have dollars available to provide additional additional deposits, as well as be able to help with deposits, utilities in some cases, and then being able to help make landlords whole in the event that there is a challenge. Moving on to the next one is YWCA. They submitted a proposal for a rent assistance program targeted to school-aged homelessness. This program would be for client housing payments for those that are staying at YWCA's Critchlow Apartments. That's the KRH, Kathleen Robeson Huntsman Apartments. So the program is designed to provide 18 months of short-term rent assistance for 3 households, which they feel would probably be 3 adults, 10 children in totality.
I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with the apartments. Are they 3-bedroom? Are they 2-bedroom? How does that work out?
Yeah, they are 2 and 3 bedroom units. They are located on YWCA's campus. So women who are victims of domestic violence can go from their shelter into kind of this transitional housing apartment complex that YWCA owns and operates. They've had some funding cuts in the last while, which has made it challenging for them to actually fill all of the units that are there. So currently they have vacant units, and they are looking for financial support to help fill those units. So this funding would help fill 3 units.
We're basically leasing 3 units for a year.
For 18 months.
18 months.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
But they are new units too, essentially, not in the current stock, so.
Right.
With case management, but this isn't funding the case management.
Correct. This is simply funding the housing. They will have access to a suite of case management services.
The housing component for it.
Exactly. The next application is Alliance House. It too is a rent assistance application for a targeted population, and they're targeting those that homeless adults with severe and persistent mental illness. We abbreviate that as SPMI, S-P-M-I. So the agency will identify community-based housing opportunities. Alliance House does have some units, however, they are really focused on placing folks in the community. These folks often have housing barriers, may not have the means for application fees, deposits, and may need some assistance with rent. So their intent is to work with the homeless population and work to get them housed immediately while they're working towards getting longer-term voucher support. I have not been identifying the request amount or the mayor's recommended budget amount, so I'm happy to add those in. So this request is at $181,000. The mayor recommended this at $40,000. The next application is Volunteers of America Intensive Case Management Team. Asking for...
I'm sorry, can we go back to the Alliance House? So all of these numbers that we're looking at that it tells us how many households will be helped is the request amount, not the actual funding amount by the mayor.
Correct.
Yeah. I wish we could see what it brings it down to. I know that it's just a mathematical equation, but that we could see if it funded 40,000, how many individuals does that really help?
Yeah, we can break that down.
That'd be great. Okay, sorry about that.
No, you're good. Volunteers of America is the next one, intensive case management team. They're asking for rent assistance for a targeted population. At their full request, their request is $407,000, a little over $407,000. The mayor recommended budget is $100,000. The difference there is really just an acknowledgement that there was not a lot of funding set aside in this category, and to encourage Volunteers of America to leverage other community resources to support this team. This is a building out a community-based intensive case management team. So hiring new staff to do case management wraparound services in the community. The majority of the funding would go towards case management and operational expense for that team. The next application is Community Development Corporation of Utah, and their application is to prevent and eliminate housing discrimination. Their ask is $76,000, and the mayor recommended it as such. This application looks to create and financially support a new organization called Utah Renters Association in an effort to provide community-based education around tenants' rights. They anticipate targeting areas of the city where evictions are the highest. The unique thing about this application is that they look to develop leaders from within the community. So targeting larger apartment complexes where evictions are happening most frequently, to work with tenants that are there and educate them on tenants' rights in an effort to help that information spread throughout that development. CDCU and I want to say URA, but URA conjures up something different in my head. So Utah Renters Association would work closely with those community-based leaders to help ensure that they're providing information. The next application, I have to apologize. We were running very quickly to get this together, and I missed one of the one-pagers. So I'll go into a little bit more detail on this one. And again, I apologize for that. And I'll work with Allison to get that to you. So Salt Lake Community Action Program, prevent and eliminate housing discrimination. Their ask was $300,000. The mayor looked to support that at $224,000. Again, an acknowledgement of the amount of funding that we had available. So Utah Community Action is looking for the implementation of a landlord-tenant mediation program to help with the flow of evicted tenants into the social services pipeline. So this is thinking a little bit upstream. Instead of waiting until a household falls into homelessness, being able to address the issue before they arrive at the HRC's door. The median cost of eviction averages $7,000, and 96% of them show up to, 96% of the cases are not being represented by a lawyer. The current system creates housing discrimination and false economic barriers due to the fact that while not criminal, those with evictions often have higher housing challenges, getting rehoused or being able to find places to rent, and often having to pay additional rents or additional deposits. The current program really focuses on those that are at 200% of poverty and below. So UCA, so to put that into terminology that we use typically here, that's 30% AMI. What Utah Community Action is looking at doing is increasing the funds to support those at 60% AMI and below. So it will double the AMI limitation there. In the past 12 months, the current program has helped 164 households, which fell between that 30 to 60% AMI. So definitely the need is there. While they were able to help those households, there was no financial support for those households, and so they often find themselves still in a challenging housing situation. So I apologize for missing that again, and I'll make sure that we get you that one.
Mr. Chair. Jennifer, how many weren't they able to help? How many households are in need of this kind of assistance according to their application?
So they receive about 400 calls a month. That is specific to eviction process. Now, that could be at a variety of stages within that. Most often it is, I've received a notice to vacate, an eviction notice, all the way through, I'm showing up to court and I have no idea what to do. So there's
400 calls a month.
400 calls a month.
And you said the average household debt, so to speak, is $7,000.
It costs $7,000 to be evicted.
So
To the tenant, $7,000 to the tenant.
I want to thank you for the small group meeting you offered. I learned a lot about all of these applications and the proposal that's before us today. And this is the one that I want to make a recommendation on to my peers. I think that the Community Development Corporation of Utah application it's a nice idea, but we see through the CAP, should I call it the CAP program? Yeah, DBA, UCA, whatever you want to call it.
The one with 400 calls.
The one that already exists, that's helping people that are coming 400 calls a month that are coming through the door that they don't have the resources for. I would propose that we allocate the $76,000 that's recommended for item 7 to item 8 to bring them up to their full amount request of $300,000 so that they can reach the people that are already coming through their doors. I think that if the CDC wants to come back in subsequent rounds, and it would help me to see evidence of that type of community leader education programming that has worked in other cities or areas, because the nature of a transient population is that it's really difficult to create leaders in that population. It's difficult to reach that population many times. But here with CAP, they have 400 calls a month coming in and they have a program already created. So I think we should fully fund item 8.
It's a great question and great comment. My question is, do we have anything left over at fund balance from items not going out, from funding our future money for the housing
No, sir.
component?
I think that Lonnie's right about in this pot.
Correct. Yes, thank you for
So
pointing that out.
that's an unusual little thing that we're working together on, is that we're trying to get a handle in working with HAND and finance. What all lapsed to fund balance from the last fiscal year, and whether there are any things that you thought were going to be done with that money that they weren't able to achieve because of the timing issues and contracts not being able to be executed by the end of the year and things like that. So right now, we don't have a handle on the dollar amounts that lapsed, the dollar amounts that were appropriated versus the dollar amounts spent. They've given us a lot of information, but it's not in the same format that the other departments use. And so we're struggling just a little bit with that. And for the future, we'll recommend a system to address that. But for now, I think it's safe to say that we don't have total information. There probably is other money that you could pull from fund balance that was originally allocated to this from funding our future. Is that a fair, do you think there was money that lapsed?
Yes.
Okay.
From other silos, the other 3 silos?
No,
No, from
Funding
funding
itself.
our future housing.
Right.
Yeah. And that's normal. I mean, we
Right.
expected that because of, the timing and the need to get contracts done and things. So if we might be able to get you at least a little more information by the 3rd. Overall, it's probably going to take some system changes to get you that in the same format that you're used to receiving it.
So, Councilmember Mendenhall, since I'm only interim today, my suggestion would be that we hold off until we see if there's any extra monies from moving them around before we do that.
Do we think there'll be information sufficient before the 3rd to discuss that?
I'm hoping that that we can see that there is some sort of extra money available, that we are not having to shift money around from other applications.
The other thing that we wondered is, based on your conversations of the past week or so and the issues of concern in the community about housing, if there is money that was dropped to fund balance, if there are other needs that you need to consider, it wouldn't have to be part of this process as far as I know. So let us make you a list of what we know and what we don't know.
And then December
work
3rd?
with these guys. And at least December 3rd, we'll be able to tell you more than we can tell you today. But I don't know, we're not going to suddenly be brilliant on December 3rd.
Yep, that sounds good to me. Council members, are you okay with that? Not really?
Well, my point isn't that, it's that I don't believe that this is an effective use at this point of $76,000 that could, with the $7,000 estimate, that's 11 households that an existing program could help to save from eviction. And I just don't think it's a good proposal at this point. But I can hold off. Thanks.
Thank you.
So it's doubling of overhead, is that your issue?
I have a comment,
Okay.
Mr. Chair.
Councilmember Valdemoros.
My comment to this is, how do we proactively work on this funds reports for next year so that we don't have to delay any of these conversations? Is it possible that we work on a system that says, these are the funds that we have asked for, these are what's being used, this is how many people we've helped, and this is where we think it was effective and where we don't think it was effective, so maybe we need to think about helping in other ways. But so that we're proactive like now, so next year we don't come back and have the same conversation and it's not fluid and now we don't know what's going on and we'll have to
We're
wait.
both very excited to tell you that we already worked together on the process for next year.
Correct.
And so this,
You read your mind.
what you're seeing tonight is sort of an abbreviated process that together we cobbled together to get through the crunch of timing. But next year, I think, is probably what I would say is an elegant process that mirrors CDBG.
Thank you.
They really worked hard at it. I think you'll be pleased. The element that you mentioned, though, that we did not talk a lot about is them measuring the effectiveness and giving you feedback about that. That's not a piece that was part of our conversation, but.
We so noted, and we are working on those metrics to be able to share that. Thank you.
I was funny, Mr. Chair. I want to give positive feedback to this process, though. I think Cindy's right. It allows, this is new funding essentially, so it's not a precedent for this. But it allows the administration, the incoming administration, to figure out how they want to target these, right? So you could change the focus next year, theoretically, to fill other gaps or other needs as presented, but then the process does the same, where you choose the gaps or the focus areas, you put out the RFP, people will reply to that, and then you sort through the process, which I think is a really great way to go about this, so that the city can then look at the county, the state, federal monies and programs and figure out not duplicating and being effective, and then the tracking it and seeing. So I like it, so thank you very much.
Welcome. Mayor-elect will have the opportunity to early start evaluating the requests for the 2021 year. So that'll be fun times. Very early on. Okay, are we okay to move forward? So we are on CDC, number 9, Community Development Corporation of Utah, their home ownership down payment assistance. Their request was for $133,000. The mayor supported that full request. This is your typical down payment assistance program. In fact, the next 3 are very Two of them are very similar, one's a little different. But offering up to $14,000 to help with down payment assistance. The unique thing about CDC's request is actually to help those that are up to 100% AMI. Their comments have been, and there's been a lot of conversation around, as our housing costs have increased, those at 60%, 70%, 80% AMI are really struggling with actually being able to find an affordable unit that they could sustain. And so instead of focusing on 80% AMI and below, like federal funding typically does, they're asking to be able to stretch all the way up to 100% AMI, because the group between 80 and 100%, due to the housing market, needs some additional assistance. Other than that, it is very similar to what you see in the CDBG process, down payment assistance to help home ownership. The next application is from International Rescue Committee. This down payment assistance program is specifically targeted to folks that show up on their doorstep, right, that intersect with the IRC. Down payment assistance program is offering between $5,000 and $15,000 to low to moderate income families. So they will target 80% and below. And then priority will be given to households with refugee and immigrant backgrounds. Their request was at $130,000, and then the mayor asked for support at $122,000. The next application is from NeighborWorks Salt Lake with their down payment assistance program. You may recall a few years ago when NeighborWorks received LIFT funding that really helped spur a lot of home ownership in our city. Wells Fargo, or they worked with Wells Fargo, got a ton of down payment assistance out there. It was a really great effort and opportunity for Salt Lake to participate in home ownership. They are not receiving any new dollars in that space, and so they are looking to fill that. Their request was at $405,000 going to down payment assistance. The mayor looked to support that at $45,000. Again, it comes down to the amount of funding that was available in that category.
And also, these are categorized or ranked by the scoring criteria. So they came in third out of 3.
The next application is First Step House and their emergency rent assistance program. So the next 3 applications are emergency rent assistance. The ones that we saw before that were rent assistance were targeted to a specific population. So while the next 3 will target a little bit, it's not as heavily targeted. First Step House is looking for $432,000. I can say numbers, $432,707. The mayor is looking to fill this request at $385,000. This emergency rent assistance program would offer short-term rental assistance, deposit and application assistance, and case management services for clients that do not meet HUD's definition of homelessness. As you may be aware, if you spend over 90 days in an institution, then you lose your homelessness status. And you are not eligible for any federal funding support. The next application is the International Rescue Committee Emergency Rent Assistance. This program is at a request of $15,000. The mayor looked to support the full request. This assistance would be provided to refugees and new Americans, providing up to 6 months of partial rent with a proof of a financial shock. In most cases, clients actually receive or only need about 1 month's worth of assistance. This program, because the population that's being targeted, there's often a learning curve in how to live and thrive in a space where budgets and finances and housing costs are just new ideas. And so this provides a little bit of support to help stabilize the population. The next one is YWCA, their emergency rent assistance. This application is similar to the other one from YWCA. The difference here is there's not children being targeted in this in this request. So YWCA is requesting $275,720. The mayor did not look to support this application. The rent assistance program would be a continuation of their current transitional housing program at the same apartments. So like I said previously, they lost some funding, and so there are units sitting vacant. The mayor looked to, once YWCA to look to other community resources to help fill that gap, and we believe that there are some opportunities that they could explore. Hence why there's no mayoral support for that application. And then the last one is Wasatch Community Gardens with an ask of $250,000. As we reviewed this application, it was very apparent that this request is to contribute to a capital campaign for 8 affordable housing units to be developed. Because this funding is focused on programs and not development, we actually did not support this application as staff, and then the mayor also agreed with that. So we would redirect Wasatch Community Gardens to the RDA to potentially access the $2.59 million of funding or future dollars that was moved to that space.
So that gets into a policy issue, I think, doesn't it? Because you would be asking them to fund more of an operation type thing through the RDA.
This is a development, so they...
It's a development,
yeah.
okay. I'm sorry,
Yeah, this is development for 8 units.
never
8
mind,
affordable
lost my
housing
mind.
units.
So those are a lot of words. There's a few things that we hear from you that would be great to follow up on. Are there any other questions that we can answer about any applications?
Yeah, any additional information? I know that Councilmember Wharton, he just joined us, and I've been waiting all day to say, "Good day, mate."
Good day.
Anything you want to add? Are you awake? Are you?
I am. It's great to be here on the second Tuesday of this date and year for me. So, but yeah, I'm good.
Okay.
Hanging in there.
Great. So I guess
Glad to
other
be
than
here.
that general information that we sent you, and we'll look for update December 3rd, right?
Thank you for creating the time and space. I know both are
Very
are
busy.
hard to come by.
Thank you. I know that you have put a lot of work into this and getting it all put together, so thank
A
you.
lot of staff behind us.
Yep.
And
Thank
Mr.
you.
Chair, can I give kudos also to Barbara?
Oh, Barb's
Barb.
amazing,
Yeah,
isn't
Barb.
she?
We will
Thank you.
definitely share that. She's out today.
Good work.
Okay.
Okay, it's 4:30, and we have 25 minutes scheduled before we have to convene as the Board of Canvassers at 5 p.m. So let's do the draft dockless shared mobility ordinance. In other words, scooters. Just kidding. That's right. I'll introduce who's coming up. Sam Owen from our council office, as he's a policy analyst, as well as John Larson, our transportation division director, and Braley Bullard. I don't know if Braley's here. Oh. Great.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So,
Sorry, Liz Bueller, why don't you tell us your, I don't know your title.
Yes, Elizabeth Bueller, Civic Engagement Manager.
Thank you.
thanks, Mr. Chair.
All right, Sam.
So the council has now received a draft proposed ordinance for the regulation of shared mobility devices in the city. The ordinance is consistent with existing temporary operating agreements the city has made with some of those shared mobility device companies so far that allow them to operate and have done for about the last 15 or so months. The proposal is still in an early input gathering phase. For example, the council office has an open city hall, a kind of engagement tool available on the topic right now, and the administration has a survey among other engagement tools active, and John and Braley can tell you more about that.
There really shouldn't be too many surprises at this point in this ordinance. Like Sam said, it really just takes most of what's been working in the pilot phase and just basically codifies it in an ordinance. I did think it might be useful to go through just a few of bullet points of just some of the feedback that we've heard in the last about year and a half that we've had scooters in the city. Some of the positive feedback is people appreciate the added flexibility. One more way to get around in and around downtown. It has a larger reach than our current dock system. It's fun. A lot of people ride them just for fun. We early on decided to have require the vendors or incentivize the vendors to deploy west of I-15 if they wanted to be able to deploy up to the full cap. A certain number had to be deployed on the west side, and we've had pretty positive feedback about that consistently. And then, generally speaking, looking, to the future, I think everyone's trying to, we worry about air quality and how do we get people out of cars, and so anything that we can do to encourage that is a good thing, and so those are some of the supportive things we've heard. As far as concerns and/or recommendations, the top thing has been sidewalk riding, particularly more senior people in and around the downtown have expressed a lot of concern about these scooters. They go fast and they're very quiet. I've had several octogenarians mention to me, that if you break a hip, you're done, right? And so that's a very real fear for them, and so it's something that we take very seriously and have been concerned about, and really been pushing the vendors to, and then been looking at things that we can do as a city to improve that issue. General complaints about safety, particularly head injuries, concerns and complaints about scooters blocking sidewalks, bus stops, ADA ramps, building entrances, etc. There's a lot of support for installing scooter docks or designated scooter parking areas. Not that we would necessarily require that people leave them there, but I think if there was a place where it made sense to leave them, that people would use that and take advantage of that. So that's one of the things that we've been putting a lot of thought and effort into. There's some thought towards putting, maybe designating some areas that are slow zones or no-go zones. The GPS isn't accurate enough to be able to just have, just the sidewalks, but we could do, because it's accurate to maybe 10 to 20 feet. So we can designate, and some of the vendors have already done this, places like Gallivan Plaza or the Temple Square area is just kind of like, look, either the scooters just stop working or they automatically drop to like 3 miles an hour. And then there's also other concerns about sustainability, e-waste, things like that. What happens, a lot of these scooters only last a month. I know that a lot of the vendors have been working hard just to stay in business, to be able to get their scooters to last longer. But then what happens with all the waste? And the last thing that we've heard from a lot of disability advocates is it'd be nice if there were options that included sit-down or trike-style scooters to make them more accessible for everyone. So the ordinance itself doesn't address necessarily a lot of those details, but what it does is it provides a framework under which the administration going forward through competitive RFP processes and operating agreements with the vendors can really address a lot of these issues. So with that, what we would really like to hear is from all of you, what your thoughts or concerns are, and with this ordinance in particular. What would you like to what changes would you recommend that we make?
Okay, council members, now's your chance. Councilmember Wharton.
So I think that some people are having the dockless, to say that some people are having a concern about the dockless scooters is very mild. People have very strong feelings about dockless scooters, at least from what I've been hearing, in terms of safety concerns. And they're worried about how, and I'm worried about how we enforce existing ordinances with the, this isn't really something we want to allocate police resources to. Are there ways that, using innovation that we can have put more of the onus on these companies to regulate their users? Would be my first question. And, a big reason for supporting these, in my view, is the active transit, first to last mile connectivity. Do we know that people are using them for those things that they wouldn't already use some other forms of active transit? And how do we know, either if we know that they are doing that, how do we know that?
Sure.
Sorry, it was a three-part question.
No, that's great. As far as the safety concerns, one of the things that we've been exploring that Sam included in his write-up that I really appreciated was this possibility of having like a easy to read identification number going down the front of each scooter, and then we'd have to just figure out who would be authorized to take a picture of that. They've been piloting this in Portland, where someone could then take that picture if it has a timestamp on it. Then the vendor, the city would then tag the vendor with a fine. He would then pass the fine on to their user, and so I think that's maybe the most promising thing that we could look at. It wouldn't necessarily have to be a police officer.
Okay.
But it's something worth exploring.
Okay, let me add to that question then. So, why can't we have other enforcement officers for scooters? Can parking enforcement ticket scooters that are riding on the sidewalk, and why, if they can't, then why not? Can they be deputized to do things like that?
I think they could if this was crafted correctly.
Okay.
So if there's interest in that.
What about council members? Can they be deputized? Okay.
I don't know.
Okay, first one was serious though.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, and there's even, I don't know. I mean,
Detective. Director Larson, will you pull your microphone closer, please?
Oh, yeah, sorry. I don't know. I mean, we couldn't necessarily pass on fines, but there's have been discussions about, allowing anyone to download an app and be able to kind of tattle on each other. I'm sure there are some people that would be more than happy to snap pictures of people breaking rules and send that in.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
We do that on the Salt Lake mobile app, so.
I think, try and hit it from all angles.
Well, is the problem here really state law, though? That we can't regulate them more than we regulate bicycles?
Well, so we would just have to make sure that whatever we do would be consistent. So in my mind, that law has more to do with speed limits and where they're allowed to ride. So if we want to ban scooters from riding on any sidewalk anywhere in the city, we'd have to do the same for bikes. Right now, I personally feel comfortable on a suburban neighborhood street, if a kid wants to ride his bike or her bike on the street, or on the sidewalk, it makes a lot of sense. They're probably not riding really fast nor dangerously. But then, there's other ideas such as, that you could have a rule that if you're outside of the central business district and you ride, it's okay to ride on the sidewalk. However, if a pedestrian is present, you have to ride at pedestrian walking speed, so 3 to 5 miles an hour. And so I think exploring things like that could make a lot of sense.
Do you want to speak to the?
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Braley had, so your other question about information on people using the scooters to replace car trips. The survey data is showing it's maybe about 1 out of 5 trips. The rest either replacing walking trips, biking trips, or just for fun. So.
And to add to that a little bit, with the survey we did last year when we were kind of asking more about perceptions of both users and non-users, 70% of the respondents, so 300 of them out of 70% of them said that they use it to replace a car trip or use it to run an errand that they would normally get in their car for. So.
Say 70%?
Yeah, 70% of 300, so quite a few.
Councilmember Mendenhall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Number one priority for me, okay, I got to admit for the first time that I'm nervous about the fact that the council's going to vote on this, probably when I'm not on the council anymore. And I won't be able to influence it in the end if that's the case. But the priority is 100% for me about protecting the pedestrian environment that we have spent hundreds of millions of dollars to create in Salt Lake City. And we are still investing in prioritizing pedestrians over the built environment for cars. And in no way do I want to compromise the pedestrian safety in Salt Lake City for the sake of scooters. That's like the foundation of this discussion for me. So when it comes to enforcement, I'm glad you brought up Portland. I think that that's an innovative idea that I heard from one of the scooter company folks, that they were bringing some ideas to the table of those cities that are a few scooter strides ahead of us in figuring out how to do enforcement in a way that doesn't cost our police department time and money that we don't want to spend on this, and instantly bills the vendor to charge the client or their participant, and takes that out of the police realm. But I love the idea of the parking folks being deputized to do that, and that SLC mobile app could be something we could explore. So I'd love to see if there are other cities who, and some of them you've cited, who are using their own mobile apps, or exactly what that camera technology entails, and then whether or not, which I would hope that the vendors would be paying for those cameras, not Salt Lake City taxpayers. I also want to know about better parking situations, and whether or not in the downtown core particularly we could have a discussion as a council about if we can afford to lose on-street parking that's currently part of our pay for parking, perhaps painted a color, that on every block face there's some dockless parking station, and it's a parking spot. It's not on the sidewalk. It's not leaning on a building and blocking an ADA button. So I'm curious about these kind of off sidewalk, off park strip, in the street parking lot style concepts. And if you have any feedback right now, that's cool. And if you don't, come back to us with it.
I think we'll have to keep exploring the enforcement and then what's legal. I know that there's some concern with at the state level, we're not allowed to do the photo cop, but if it's a human being taking the picture,
well, I want
that's
to
kind of
push
a gray
back
area.
on that because, and we don't need to get into it right
Sure.
now, but maybe Lynn Pace from a legislative perspective could help us. It's different from the photocop.
Right.
We
Well,
aren't
I'm saying
charging
it is.
individual drivers. We're charging a company that we're contracted with who would agree in our contract to that kind of an operation. It's totally different use of the camera technology.
I agree.
So I don't buy that. I also want to know what other cities are doing with smart technology, like Councilmember Wharton was asking about with, it's their economic tracking that we can do. Are there some other kind of sensor opportunities or big data opportunities in collaborating with the vendors that we could gain more perspective about it. I also am interested in our very old transportation master plan and how a new master plan might contemplate the integration of shared mobility into our network, because I think you guys are doing the absolute best you can and using the national resources that we have. I also think we should update our transportation master plan so it's reflective of the future of mobility, which we'll talk about more in the future. And there's one other thing.
In the future. I like that.
Actually, that's all for now. Thanks.
Yeah, because in the future, you'll have a lot to talk about with this.
Can I comment on the comment about using curb space? I don't think that would require any change to the ordinance. We currently do things like bike corrals. It's pretty popular with downtown businesses, particularly bars and other restaurants that we can. That's actually pretty quick and easy to do. It's just often people push back, but once people understand that if you can fit 8 to 10 scooter or bike parking spaces in the place of one car parking spot, then it's actually good for business. So, that's something we can move on quickly.
Can I say one more thing?
Yeah, one more thing.
I'll be fast.
You promise.
On the data opportunity, you could imagine where if we were able to work with the vendors and see where scooters are riding, it could inform our pavement operations as a city, our streets maintenance and our streets rebuilding. Are scooters avoiding certain streets because of the condition of the street? Are they using certain streets because that's where and how might that inform the investments that we're making today and next year and in the future in our transportation infrastructure? So that at a minimum seems like the kind of data collaboration we should be looking for in these new contracts.
Thank you, Councilmember Mendenhall. Councilmember Valdemoros.
Hi, thank you. I think what I've been hearing from different constituency and kind of doing some informal research out there, I think there's there are generational differences and they feel differently about scooters, which they're all legitimate, and I think, welcome. Hi. So I think that's, an older generation is thinking about their motor skills and how, a scooter going really fast could affect them because they're not fast enough to be alert. So that's totally legit. And also they're afraid of, the cost of injuries that these scooters might be generating. So one of the things that we've been talking about, can we get data from the ERs out there to figure out how much scooters are affecting our streets in that sense, as a health hazard, if you will. Another thing that a different group of, a different generation says, the speed is not an issue for my generation, but my issue with the scooters, as I think about this is, well, one, they provide mobility for me because I am 22 years old and I don't have a driver's license and I don't want to drive anymore. I think these are pretty convenient to me, so I use them. But if we're trying to help the environment and our air, what are the scooter companies doing for building stronger materials and more durable materials for their scooters? But also, if they're paying people to come over to pick them up in a van, is that offsetting, whatever you're saving in emissions, but with the vans driving around and, and polluting the air? So is that good enough then? Are we doing good if that's our goal as a city with air quality? And then the third one I had in mind, things that I'm thinking about, it's the usage and the deterioration of our sidewalks. like if scooter companies are, their users are using our sidewalks and they are deteriorating our sidewalks, how are they financially compensating the city so that we can replace or mend some of the sidewalks that their scooters might be deteriorating. So those are the things that I have in my mind, and if we can get any information of that, that would be great. But, and then the last thing also in my mind is that, as planners and as we're looking at downtown, we've always wanted people to come downtown, and we're trying from all these different ways. We want patrons to visit all the businesses, to go to the bars, so I feel the scooters might be contributing to that. Like they are bringing different groups of people downtown that they might not have thought about it before. So I think that's also to take into consideration. They are contributing to that, like positively. The visit to downtown and the patriotism of our businesses. So that's where I'm at. So if there's any information, or later, that's fine, but those are the things that I would look at when we make other decisions.
Great, thank you, Councilmember Valdemoros. Any other questions? Councilmember Johnston.
I want to echo a couple things. I think you brought up the right points. I think the enforcement's a big issue, and figuring this out with the companies and their responsibility versus our responsibility versus the rider's responsibility. I do agree with Councilmember Mendenhall that pedestrian safety is a huge issue with this. I want to state very clearly, though, as a scooter rider myself, it's not about the sidewalk being desirable. The street's not desirable. And I went to the Monson Center this morning on South Temple, and there's not a good way to go there. I rode my bike. There's not a good way to go there. If you're going to get there on South Temple, it's going to be on the sidewalk. Unless you're a serious bike rider and you can take one of the lanes and negotiate the lanes of traffic in the morning, it's not a good environment. We have to look at the city and heavily invest in multiple modes of transportation options on streets. This is not the first or the last time we're going to have an alternative to cars or walking. We have to find the infrastructure in there to make it happen. I would advocate also to look at downtown as a particular need for this particular. We know why. There's a lot more downtown. It's much more congested, and that's a lot more interference between cars, bikes, pedestrians, and scooters. It's a difficult environment down there. When we're using it for first and last mile, though, outside the downtown core, we have to keep in mind of where you park them and how you park them might be different. I think it's a worthy idea to look at parking spaces, on-street parking options, but with the first mile, last mile, it can't be every 4 blocks. We have to look at those things because in residential areas, you don't have a lot of space like that to pull that off. We know how tight parking is in our residential areas right now, and we know how few options outside of their literal sidewalk and the street there are. So I think we need to look some flexibility there and figure out a mutually beneficial solution to that. Because I think it does fill a big niche, particularly if we find a variety of types of scooters, that not just the stand-up small ones. It could fill a huge niche for a lot of other folks that currently don't have access to that. So I want to balance those things out. And in the current ordinance as it's written, I don't know there was a lot of flexibility in differentiating high congestion urban areas like the downtown core versus some of the outlying residential areas as far as enforcement of parking and those kind of things. I'm not saying we shouldn't enforce it outside of the downtown core, but we've got to be able to figure out some other solutions out there that are cost effective for everybody and safe for everybody. So I'd be looking for a little bit of acknowledgement of the differences across the city there.
Yeah, that was going to be my comment too, is that I feel like it's more of a downtown issue instead of being in the neighborhoods where you don't see them as much. So for me, it would be looking at some sort of enforcement just around that area. I mean, you're not going to send them out to communities to do that. So yeah, we will look forward to those little changes or tweaks that you might have and information that you can bring forth to us as we are looking at this, not anytime soon, but we'll be looking for those changes or looking for some sort of things. Yes, Councilmember Wharton.
Thank you. Just one quick follow-up. So a lot of what we've been telling residents is that a lot of the problems that we're experiencing with with riders on sidewalks downtown, they're violating existing city ordinances. Can you tell me how many people have been cited for violating existing ordinances on dockless scooters?
I'm not aware of any at this point.
Okay.
That's something we need to figure out. It's put the police in a pretty tough position. I don't want to speak for them, but that's something that I'm sensitive to, and I want to figure out how we can structure things to set them up for success.
Okay. Because if there's a culture of zero enforcement, then I think that that's a pretty obvious target to start with.
Yeah.
Some enforcement being, to try there and lay some heavy fines on people that are being unsafe. So, thank you.
Yeah. Mr. Chair, can I answer maybe really quick a couple, or just comment on a couple things? So we'll go back and do some homework, and we'll see what needs to be updated in the ordinance versus what could be done administratively. But we've been working closely with finance on the, Councilmember Valdemar also mentioned the financial impact. So they've done some assessments of what the financial impacts have been thus far. And then we'll do some analyses of going forward. What are some things, whether that's additional staff to help manage the program, or city-sponsored parking stations and things like that. And once they've said that probably the cleanest way to deal with the financial impacts would be to get an ordinance on the books, and then they can follow up quickly thereafter to update the fees that we charge the vendors. So just a heads up that's in the works, and that will be following closely after. And then data, we have reached out to all the hospitals in the city. The only one that we've really heard back from is University Hospital, and they've given us some updated data. And as expected, there are people that are hurt riding scooters. And I was surprised at the, I was thinking stereotypically it would be 18-year-old males, but it was wide range of ages and gender. So it was everything from kids to 60-year-old women. So that was a little bit surprising. But as far as the actual number, it's not actually that far out of line with what we see for bicycles, maybe a little bit higher.
Great, thank you very much. So that takes us past the item 10, which was the draft dock list shared mobility ordinance, and we are going to recess, I believe, is this correct? We're going to recess as the city council, and we're going to convene as the board of canvassers because it is almost 5 o'clock. We are 1 minute shy, so hang on. Don't want to get us in trouble, right, Cindy Mansell? Okay. Yeah.
So, Mr. Chair.
It is 5 o'clock.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. So we are going to convene as the board of canvassers.
I'll save my fun anecdote for later.
I'm just kidding. I was just doing that to be rude. Let's hear it.
Well, I knew you were excited to tell me g'day.
Yeah, g'day, mate.
But I literally almost didn't make it here because of my connecting flight through the LA airport, which is terrible, and not at all like our new airport, which will be amazing and flawless. But I almost didn't make it because they make you go out of security and right back into it, and they weren't not going to let me on the plane with my boomerang. How Australian is that?
Seriously.
And
yeah.
yeah, I want to see it too. And
to
I
leave it
bet
in
they
LA.
don't offer free menstrual hygiene products in their bathrooms.
You know what? They don't. Well, they're not in the men's room. So But you know what? I mean,
You made it.
I made it. I was able to talk him into letting me bring my boomerang home.
Well, it's the
And,
attorney in you, man.
Well, you know.
And the charmer,
That's
just a
right.
general charmer.
Right. That law degree is really paying off.
That boomerang right there. Okay, so opening ceremony, there is none. Public hearings, none. Potential action items, none. New business, we have the resolution of the canvass of the Salt Lake City Municipal General Election of 2019. So we're going to look for a resolution, the canvassing, and accept and approving the results of the municipal general election held in Salt Lake City, Utah on November 5th, 2019. Yes, we need to bring up the city recorders, right? Cindy Mansell, Nicole Smedley, welcome. Why don't you present to us the final canvas, right?
Okay, in the 2019 general municipal election, there were 91,887 registered voters, 46,272 ballots cast for a total voter percentage turnout of 50.36%. For mayor, Aaron Mendenhall at 26,762 votes, duly elected. Luz Escamilla, 19,393 votes. For Council District 2, Andrew Johnston, 1,745 votes, duly elected. Moroni Benali, 1,075 votes. Council District 4, Ana Valdemaros, 4,734 votes, duly elected. Leo Rogers, 866 votes. Council District 6, Dan Dugan, 4,655 votes, duly elected. Charlie Luke, 4,473 votes.
I don't know. I don't think it's inappropriate, Madam Chair.
Mr. Chair, can I make a motion?
Yes.
That we approve, I move that the Board of Canvassers adopt the proposed resolution accepting, approving, and certifying the results of the municipal general election held in Salt Lake City, Utah on November 5th, 2019.
Second.
Oh, or you?
Too late.
I didn't hear a second.
Yeah, I think Anna should second it.
I just heard, okay, there we go.
Anna.
Yes. A motion by Council Member Mendenhall and a second by Council Member Valdemaros to accept the canvas. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And that motion passes. So congratulations to all of those electeds. Anna, she's here. So Anna, why don't you stand up? Andrew Johnston, why don't you stand up? And Dan Dugan of Council District 6. Come on, Dan, why don't you stand up? And then our Mayor-elect, Aaron Mendenhall. So congratulations, everyone. Yeah. Yeah, there's no unfinished business, no consent, and that's the end of us in the Board of Canvassers, and we will re-adjourn, or we'll reconvene as the City Council. It's 5 o'clock. Let's go into item number 11, which is the budget amendment number 2, an employment staffing document for fiscal year 2019 and 2020 follow-up.
And, Mr. Chair, there's a part of this that relates to Councilmember Mendenhall. And so if you can separate that and do that after she's stepped out, but do the rest while she's here.
I'm going to
Sounds
recuse
great.
myself for that transition funding portion.
Okay. So we have Ben Ludke from our council office. He's a policy analyst at the table. And I know that we have Mary Beth Thompson, who is the chief financial officer, as well as John Vike, the city budget director, I think available. They're here. Yes, Mary Beth. All right, Ben.
This is the second briefing for budget amendment number 2 of fiscal year 2020. The public hearing was on November 12th, and the council is scheduled for a partial vote tonight just on the transition expenses, since the transition period begins tomorrow and the funding needs to be available at the same time. The first update, at the last briefing, the council took a straw poll and unanimously supported early hire advertising for the Streets Division Director. The council asked at the time why the division directors in public services are a mix of appointed and merit positions. The response from the administration is that the three divisions, this would be Trails and Natural Lands, Urban Forestry, and the Gallivan, are merit instead of appointed because they are at a lower pay grade. The divisions have smaller budgets relative to the other 6 divisions in the department, and they supervise fewer employees. The city does not appear to have a policy or a set of criteria to determine when division-level positions should be appointed or merit. State law does come into play for statutory officers, such as a city engineer or a city recorder, and appointing department directors. And all staff in the mayor's office and the council's office are appointed, but it is a case-by-case basis at the division level. There's a policy question if the council would like to request the administration develop a policy and criteria for these division-level situations, and or if you'd like clarification from the attorney's office on the council's scope to determine merit versus appointed positions.
Ms. Jensen.
From a policy point of view, you could argue it either way, I'm sure, but consistency is always a good thing. In the past, what I've noticed with the departments is that as there was turnover, they would change a merit position into an appointed position. And so for the people who had been in their positions for a very long time, starting from before division directors were appointed, then those people have the right to remain in the appointed position, I think. But then as I thought that the plan was, as those division director positions turned over, that they would become appointed. So there might be some history we could look back on with human resources, and then just provide the information to the council. Then you can determine if you want to.
I think there's a HR rep who could also speak to it now if the council is interested.
I don't know if you want to take the time now.
Yeah, let's hear it. Mr. Salazar, thanks for being here.
So yes, this is something that over time, as positions have become vacant and certain department directors have wanted to exercise discretion in appointing individuals to those positions. So we've presented those to the council via the compensation plan and the appointed pay plan that's included as part of that document. So that's where those changes typically have been updated and presented to the council for approval. And so we do not have a set of criteria, and we agree that having some consistency going forward would be beneficial so that it's less of a haphazard process in designating what those appointments, whether they be appointed or merit. So any further questions that you have about that?
Yeah, I guess that's a policy question, isn't that? I mean, we need to discuss on how those are going to be at merit, or are they, appointed, right?
Correct.
I would love to see a recommendation from the administration, or maybe the future administration, or however long that takes to get done, so.
And we'd be happy to work on that.
Great. Council members, any other questions in regards to this HR appointment? Yes? Good. All right, thank you.
Right.
And staff will make a note to follow up on that in the next annual budget when the annual compensation plan comes before you. That's one of the policy documents that you could put any policy or criteria in for this issue. Item A1 is landfill monitoring. The council asked for some additional information on the engineering services that the city provides. The current consultant contract expires in December 2020. The RFP went through the standard city process. There were 3 bids that were received. The contract has a 5-year term. The consultant meets twice a year with the sustainability department and the landfill director to review activities and upcoming plans. There is a specialized skill set given the high level of regulation for landfills. There are federal, state, and local rules and regulations that have to be followed. The staff report has a list of specific services that I won't read out. The consultant provides all of these services on an ongoing basis, and the city's engineer is the procurement agency for each of these collection, monitoring, and repair and replacement services. If there are specific questions about these services or about the next RFP, we can follow up on those. And just a reminder, the $1.25 million that's being requested in this budget amendment is paid back. It's reimbursed to the city. This is to create the budget to allow those services until the city is reimbursed. The next item is A3, the Community and Neighborhoods Department Director and new part-time employees. This is a request for $120,000 of funding. The council requested some additional information on workload. The department responded that the elevated workload they're currently experiencing is expected to be an ongoing level of service increase. They are not currently requesting additional FTEs, but are planning to do an assessment once vacancies are filled. The council had requested the list of positions that are currently vacant, and that is pending information. And there's a bit of detail specific to one of the offices within the department, the CAN director. This recently increased from 8 FTEs in fiscal year 19 to 18 in the current fiscal year. So this is an increase of 10, and this is mostly a result from transferring existing positions related to real estate services and CIP out of hand and into the CAN director's office.
Ben, when you say mostly, does that mean there's some that aren't just transfers, or?
Were there new created positions
Yeah.
at that time as well?
I think there is one that would fall into that category, yes. The other bit of detail is 7 of those 18 positions have been vacant during this calendar year because of staff turnover, and that's had an impact on their ability to deal with their current elevated workload.
You know why they've been vacant?
I defer to the department on their hiring.
Okay, well, that seems like a question that should be answered at some point.
Jennifer McGrath, Deputy Director of CAN.
One of those was the department director, and that position was vacant for quite a while. I don't know how many months exactly.
Can I focus us real quick? Yeah. Are there 7 positions still vacant?
No.
So all of the positions are now filled?
No, I'm trying to think how many we have offhand that aren't filled, but some of them have been filled, yes. That's just 7 have been vacant over the course of this year at some point.
Can we talk about the ones that are currently vacant, please?
Sorry, I didn't come prepared with that list.
And you don't have to do it right now because I'm just throwing this out there, but I would be curious.
For sure, the CIP position is vacant. And do we still have a property agent position vacant?
We have a current list that we've gone through. So we have a current list that we could provide.
Yeah, if you could get us that
staff.
list, that would be great.
Absolutely.
Just have it emailed to the staff.
I don't mean to put you on the spot, Jen.
Most of
at
them
all.
have been filled.
Okay.
Okay.
So we'll come back with the list of all of the vacancies within the department at the next briefing. The next item is A6. The council asked for an update on codifying and standardizing the current practices for grants and donations. You passed a legislative intent to this effect a little over a year ago. The administration reports that they are currently working on ordinance changes and revised policies, and they're hoping to transmit the proposal to the council by the end of the year. This item in the budget amendment increases the grant holding account from 2 million to 3 million, and this is the result of the city receiving larger and more grants. So that's a good thing.
Yes.
So, this is a topic that you may at some point want to have a complete briefing on, and I know that finance would be glad to do that. It's a trust situation between the city council and the finance department. the council is basically saying, we recognize that it is important to keep the business of the city moving as quickly as possible and to put grant funding to work right away as soon as it's received. So this allows for that to happen rather than having the grants received and then having a gap between the time that the grant is received and the council has time on its agenda to appropriate it. And so that is why you see that system where there are items on your agenda that are on a hearing, and those are applications, the grants that the city has applied for. And the reason that's sort of a check and balance thing so that you have the opportunity to know what has been applied for. And then if you have a problem, you can raise it then, and then we can figure out whether or not that is going to get this advanced funding if the grant is authorized to the city. So it's a unique approach. It's not. It hasn't had any problems in the past that I can think of, but it is a significant leap of faith between the council with the council and the administration. So. And then this is really increasing it by 50%, right?
Correct.
The next item is A10. This is also council edit item I1. The council edit item is $100,000 for police overtime for patrols. A10 is $136,800, which is a combination of $87,000 for security and patrols in this building and on Washington Square, and a remaining $49,000 for patrols in city parks. There's a policy question about which specific problems the funding is intended to solve, or if the appropriation would be providing flexibility to the police department to have their own discretion about which of these to prioritize. Staff heard 4 categories in the council's previous discussions. One of them is focusing on increasing patrols on Washington Square. Another is assisting parks employees with closing restrooms at night. A third is increasing patrols at city parks and urban trails. And the fourth is more broad than the other 3, and it's officers spending more time in identified crime hotspots, which could but may not include city parks. So if the council wanted to have a discussion about which of these 4, or if there's a preference for providing that flexibility, I know the police department is here to participate in the discussion. And last Friday, after the staff report was published, we received several pages of information in response to specific questions from the council. I can summarize some of the information here, but I think the key point is the police department said that providing 4 officers per day for 4-hour shifts, 7 days a week, that the department would need $60,480 of additional overtime funding in addition to the amount requested in order to provide that through the end of the fiscal year. And so that would be less than the council's additional funding of $100,000, which is currently in the budget amendment.
Yes, Councilmember Mendenhall.
Yeah, I brought this one up. I think some of us had similar concerns. This, in a large part, came out of public comments we received. We have some of those folks in the audience tonight from different parts of the community who have felt that the restrooms aren't being closed enough at night, that there's not, and we know from the Parks Department, they're not always safe for Parks employees to go in there and do that closing. Also from the ballpark community, who's requested through these community conversations we've been having an increase in overtime officer availability for patrols of hotspot areas, which I know are in flux at all times and that you're evaluating those at all times. But those, so items 2, 3, and 4 in the policy question are acutely what I was going after, not the increased patrols on Washington Square in the city and county building. That feels like a very separate issue to me. And the point of this gap, or I see it as gap funding, while the police department goes through the work of recruiting and training, hiring the additional officers that we granted through the normal budget process earlier this year. It takes 9-10 months to get those officers up and online. So it's insufficient to me to only do the funding through the end of this calendar year. The point of this funding was to give the police department the flexibility to respond to hotspots, assist with park bathroom closures, and do more parks and urban trail patrolling in that entire gap period. So Ben, to you, the 60,000 or so through the end of the fiscal year, is it sufficient for us to estimate that if we, or should I not get into figuring out how many dollars per month that is if we want to extend it all the way into the point at which Chief could tell us they feel like they may have those additional officers online? I don't like doing math up here at this desk. It never goes well for any council member, but if I have to, I will try.
I think the biggest question is the 23 additional officers, when they'd be available. And if they're available July, the beginning of the next fiscal year, that would reduce the need for overtime funding, I would assume. But I think that's a question for the police.
Mr. Chair, could we ask Chief to come up and talk about that timeline?
Can I also, you can't fund overtime for next fiscal year, so that would have to come back through your next budget cycle, through the new administration's budget cycle. So you're going to only fund through the end of this fiscal year, and then during your regular budget cycle, fund that overtime.
I'm sorry, I meant the calendar year. Because I think
okay.
you were saying that the calendar year, this 60,000 is just to get us to January 1.
60,000 is for the fiscal year. That would
Why
be
is
it.
it so little?
So the
Through June, correct?
Through June 30th.
Oh my goodness,
Correct.
I misunderstood.
And so that 60,000 also assumes the 49,000 that the administration is already requesting as part of item A10. So you've got the 49,000 plus the 60,000.
Right, okay, that makes sense. Sound good, Chief?
Good evening.
Hi.
Hi. Yeah, what we were looking at is funding to close the bathrooms from 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. And our first blush was we were going to do 2 officers for the entire city. What we think is a better measure is to have 2 officers on both sides of the town, so 4 total from 10 to 2. So the numbers would basically just double. The council gave us the 136? If you take out the monies for the building security, we had about okay, we started doing the bathrooms in October and November, to the tune of about 13,000 a month, and we've done that. We now have, hang on a second, let me get I'm doing math from the table here too.
Was that out of your normal funding, that 13,000?
No, that was from that 136 that was on the budget amendment.
Okay.
Okay, so we got $136,800 in the budget request. $87,000 of that would go to the security shifts here at the City and County Building. That would leave us with $49,400 to close those restrooms. Like I said, we started closing the restrooms in October and November. It'll cost us about $23,000 to close them for those 2 months. So we'll have $19,383 to start next spring. We anticipate starting April, May, and June, and that'll get us to the fiscal year. So asking for the 4 officers instead of the 2 that we're doing right now, I think that's a lot of bathrooms to close and a lot of work to be done for 2 officers in as many as parks as we have here in the city. So that would double the amount. So we're asking for an additional $60,480 to accomplish that through April, May, and June. Does that math make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense, but for me, I think moving forward, this is where our park ranger program fits. So, moving forward, right? So, yep. I know, but I'm just saying that I think it can be even bigger. I mean, if we're just looking at 8 people, basically 4 people that we're looking at from the police department, I think we can do better. I really do. I'm just saying. Yes, Councilmember Fowler.
Mr. Chair? Mr. Chair, is that okay? I agree with Councilmember Mendenhall. I think the intention on my part for this was implementing the park ranger program as soon as possible. And in this case, it meant the bathroom work, specifically through the wintertime. But that's my concern is if it's getting diverted elsewhere, I hope it's not, whether it's here or somewhere else, because I think the feedback I got was Poplar Grove Park and Jordan Park and Glendale Park, frankly, needing police officers present now kind of thing. So is that, help me understand how that works maybe through the wintertime versus, say, springtime when you're talking about April, May, June?
Well, we met with, Lisa Schaefer has park managers, and they're assigned to the 4 quadrants here in the city. So we went and met with them and asked them, look, how can we best help you? And we took our CIU officers, because each of you have a CI officers assigned to each of your district. But what we're trying to do is increase the communication and the collaboration and the effort. And when we get the park rangers up and going, we would love to plug them in seamlessly and hit the ground running. And they said, look, if you can close the bathrooms every night and kick people out of the park for curfew, that would really make our jobs so much easier in the morning, because that we wouldn't be, the vandalism and the damage and trying to, the things that are going on in those bathrooms. And so that's that was the genesis for what we thought we could do. Now, I know we're talking about the park rangers, but let me ask you this. Do we really want our park rangers closing the bathrooms at 10 o'clock at night to 2 a.m.? Or would we rather have them out amongst the people throughout the park during the busy times when a lot of people are enjoying the parks throughout the summer? So I'm proposing maybe the best of both worlds. It may take some funding to do the overtime at night to close those parks, but I would much rather have a park ranger team, and it can ebb or flow. We can put more people on there, that is supervised, that is directed, that is community policing modeled, rather than just do it with overtime, because overtime is just overtime. And so that's kind of my thinking. This park ranger team is not going to be ready until August. So this funding will give us those 4 officers to close the bathrooms. Now, we will step up the game working with parks managers and our CIU officers, and we'll have the overtime to close the bathrooms. As soon as we get the park rangers in August, they'll jump into this game seamlessly. So that's the difference between creating overtime shifts or doing it with a squad. And I talked to Lisa, and Lisa proposed some different numbers. The numbers that she is looking at were quite a bit more. And the last time I sat here and talked to the council, some of these questions, Mr. Chair Charlie Luke was saying, Chief, there are people behind you shaking their fists because we're trying to give you money. We did a lot of park shifts last year to the tune of about 1,400. If we did the same under the proposal from Parks, it would be almost 3 times that, about 4,000 4-hour shifts. I'm telling you right now, you don't want to live and die on overtime. It's just a Band-Aid. And so you can throw so much money at overtime that you'll never fill it. And I think we're almost at saturation on some of those because we're not filling some of those shifts. I'm saying let's go with the 4 overtime officers in the spring to the tune of about 60,000. We'll have the 19,000 left over that if we need to kick it off in a warm March, we can do that. But then if we really need more people, let's not put a Band-Aid by using overtime. Let's look at hiring more officers or expanding that squad.
I have a lot of questions right now, so bear with me. I'm going to start, because it will eventually follow back around, with security shifts here in the building. How much did you say we're asking for security shifts here in the building? What was that?
87,360.
87,000?
Of the 136, it was, the budget amendment was for 136,800.
$87,360 for security shifts.
Right.
Here in the building.
Right.
And that is from October through the end of the fiscal year.
Right.
We've already hired those security shifts, right?
And they're going.
So we have to pay those.
No, no.
You do not.
No, they're just posted overtime on our overtime.
So right now, they're currently just doing overtime.
Yeah, right.
Okay. And I guess, at what point, and I know this was part of the administration, I just want to, did we decide that we needed more? And I know that we had a vote here or something, there was discussion about it, but when was it that we decided we needed, police officers here in the building? Do you remember?
No, the council did not decide. That, it was an administrative decision, and I believe made by the mayor's office. They have offered to come and do an executive session, and we have not scheduled that. Patrick isn't here tonight, and he's the principal person that we would need to speak with, so.
I'd ask a little bit of a debriefing on that, based on that $87,360.
All right.
And so shifting from, going back a little bit, but I think we can answer this outside of executive session. When was the last time that we had Salt Lake City Police here policing the building?
On an overtime basis?
Yeah.
Do you remember, Tim? I don't remember.
No? Okay. So shifting from that, I think one of the questions that comes up to me about the 4 overtime in the spring to close down the bathrooms, remind me again what we're doing right now with the bathrooms. And this may, sorry, Lisa and Kristen, to put you on the spot if we need to talk about it, but what now are we doing with our bathrooms in our parks? When do we close them and who closes them? Thank you, Lisa. I apologize.
Public
And I know we
Services
sort of talked
Director.
about this a lot, but
Schaefer.
I want to narrow this down a little bit for me.
No, thanks for the question. I think it's worth clarifying. Our restrooms are closed every winter, and in fact, they're closed now. In a lot of cases, yes.
Closed.
They are
Permanently.
closed. Until the spring.
Oh.
For the winter.
So people experiencing homelessness that happen to need to use the restroom aren't able to use our bathrooms because they're closed right now?
Correct, unless we provide portables, which in some cases we do.
Okay. And what parks would we maybe provide portables?
I don't have that off the top of my head, but I can get it for you.
And is there any sort of security around those portables, or are those open?
Those are open. There's no way to secure a portable.
Okay. So I guess my point in asking these questions is that for me, as we have talked about our communities, and we spent an entire 3 hours last week talking about our communities experiencing homelessness and the needs of our communities experiencing homelessness, that there are certain things that we as a city can do. And so it is important for me that we're looking at this right now, and everybody has to use the restroom at some point. It's just humans, right?
I agree.
And what we've heard in the past from Lisa's department is that unfortunately, some of your department who go in and help with our parks have been threatened. And that is actually why we came to this idea as a council to say, well, should we have some police officers or some sort of presence within our parks, which was a huge debate about what that looked like. We can all remember the park rangers, but the reason was because we have a responsibility, and this is part of that responsibility, in my opinion. And so we're closing down a facility that people use. And to be fair, I go to the parks in the wintertime too. And when I have my 6-year-old nephew with me that needs to use the restroom, and the restroom is closed. But I understand why Ms. Schaefer and her team have to close it down if they're being threatened or they don't have the manpower, which is why we sort of talked about bringing in this park ranger police force idea, is to help so that we can keep the bathrooms, at least some of them, open and work at that. And so now to hear that we're not, I'm a little frustrated right now that now this is like, well, in spring, in August, we have a problem right now.
Can I make a clarifying statement about that? The activities that are not bathroom related are only one of the reasons that we close our restrooms.
Sure.
So there's winterizing that has to be done, and in some places we can't keep the restrooms warm enough to not freeze over. And so that's one of the reasons that's a pretty standard practice to close those up. It's not just for the other reasons. And so, but I will say that it is a huge issue for us, and that a lot of our restrooms could remain open and be accessible if we could ensure the safety of the patrons that want to use those restrooms and the employees who are tasked with opening, closing, and cleaning those restrooms.
And I appreciate you bringing up the other reasons why, because I think that is a larger discussion that needs to happen.
Sure.
And I recognize that there's a lot of other elements that go in, and we all flush our sprinklers out at the end of the fall, right? I get.
We don't
sort
have
of the
heaters in these
logistics
bathrooms.
of those.
So, yeah.
But I mean, you have to winterize and do those things. So I understand the logistics. I appreciate you bringing that up. I just think that there are some other things that I think there was an intent here in bringing up these issues of having park rangers and having bathrooms opened and closed. And the intent right now doesn't feel like, from my perspective, our intent of going forward with something like this is necessarily being met.
Yeah, no, I can appreciate that. I feel like that trying to split the baby, so to speak, using overtime to close the bathrooms in the dark and after curfew is probably a good use of officers, and then keeping and reserving the park ranger squads for the hired usage of the park. I mean, we can manipulate this however you'd like. It costs about $20,000 a month to close the bathrooms based on 4 officers so that's what you're looking at. So if you wanted to do it December and January and February, that's another $60,000. So, I mean, we can do it, but to try to staff huge amounts of time, 4,000 4-hour shifts, I think we're going well past the saturation. I mean, we only allow our officers to work 32 hours of overtime a week. That's 1,600 hours in a year. That's like 2 full-time jobs. If you start pushing officers to work so many time, they're not as effective on our time. And so we try to strike that balance. And so I'm saying, let's look at this holistically, and if we need more park rangers, because we're only looking at 5 and a sergeant, that is a lot of turf to cover.
And
And
I
so-
appreciate that part-time is a Band-Aid,
Yeah.
but we're also in November, and we're lucky that we've had like 50 and 60-degree weather in November.
Yeah.
I don't imagine that that's going to continue.
Right.
And so I recognize that it's a Band-Aid, and I appreciate the holistic view. I also think we need some sort of Band-Aid for right now. And that is a discussion that we have to have, and I appreciate you. I get it,
Yeah.
right? And it's all about the money and where we get it and where we put it.
Well, and it takes time,
But
too,
I think
because
that
we've
we also
hired-
have to be creative of how we do this, and
Yeah,
that's
we've
all
hi-
I'm saying.
We've hired those cops. They're working as fast as they can in the academy classes, and we'll get them through FTO as soon as we can, but it's really going to be about August before we see them on the street.
Member Mendenhall.
Thanks. The bathroom clarity has been helpful. I'm not sure that we should keep every bathroom open that isn't built to be open, and then we're dealing with plumbing cracking and things. But that was a piece of the problem here. And when I said to you, why is it so cheap? It's because we're only talking about bathrooms. And this whole proposal and the items listed in the policy were that we wanted to increase patrols in the parks and urban trails during daytime hours. We wanted to give you more opportunity for hotspot allocation as those hotspots come up in the city. And we're not addressing any of that with this. It's just bathrooms.
Yeah, in the other funding sources that we have, and we identified there were 7 different funding sources that allow us to do some of that. So I'm not trying to say no to money, and I would love our officers to have the overtime. I just want to make sure that if you give us the overtime, we have the people to work it.
I appreciate that. This meeting is the first I've heard of that.
Yeah.
So we're about to take action on this budget amendment tonight, and I feel like the bathroom allocation is like, that's not even the reason that I brought this budget amendment together.
Yeah.
It's this
Well, that's kinda
other
where- yeah,
thing
kinda-
over here.
Yeah, morphed to that, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so where are the increased patrols? What should we do about this?
Tim, you want to talk about hotspots and heat maps and?
And why, how did that fall off? It was in the original budget amendment proposal. It's right here as a follow-up to our last discussion. Why isn't there money for it? We're trying to give you money.
I know. I can appreciate
The
that.
community wants this.
I know. Go ahead, Tim.
Do you want me to answer questions about hotspots? And I think you guys all know what those are. If I can answer those
I
questions.
don't need to know what a hotspot is. I want to know why there isn't a recommendation in here for overtime officers to better address hotspots and to increase patrols in our parks and our urban trails. That's why we put this budget amendment together, this item. And we're not doing that. We're closing bathrooms. Why?
I wasn't.
I think that it's because looking at what we accomplished last year in 2018, we did 1,400 shifts of overtime. I just don't know how much more we can do. And I completely appreciate you're trying to give us the money. If I don't have officers signing up to do those shifts, I don't know what to do. We can try, we can post, we can see how much more we can do on overtime. I'm just saying, overtime is a Band-Aid to fix. And if that's what we're trying to do until we get those park rangers out, we'll push as hard as we can on that. I don't want to post shifts that go unfilled.
I wish we would have known this before the night we're voting on it.
Yeah, this is frustrating. Councilmember Johnston.
So just so I'm clear before we move on to the next topic. So as of now, I know the parks bathrooms are closed for the season until April, right? So between now and April, the funding that's allocated is going towards what, I guess? Between now and April, what's the funding going to go towards if we approve this for overtime for officers?
I'm sorry, sir, say it again. Tim was in my ear.
Between now and April, if all the bathrooms are closed, the funding that's being allocated towards the police department for these purposes, what would it be used for between now and April through the winter time?
The allocations for?
What would it be? Because before it's used, before and after, saying it'd be used to close down the bathrooms during certain times at night. When the bathrooms are already closed, where does the money go right now?
We don't have a budgeted, sir.
Okay.
Yeah, no, we didn't schedule to have a budget.
But nothing's scheduled between now and April for this purpose then, is that correct? Okay.
Yeah, and
for this, but outside, this building does have some money allocated towards security for it, okay.
Mayor-elect, Tim and I were just discussing, maybe we misread the question. We thought that we were trying to provide the funding sources and what we accomplished with each of those and how we could close the bathrooms. If I could ask for another week to come back and give you a proposal as to what we think we can accomplish. I just don't want to, I want to be able to answer your question with some thought
Cindy
and preparation.
has a statement here.
Well, just a thought that on the 10th, I believe the national group that did the funding or did the staffing study of the police department is coming to talk to the council, and that might be a good time for the council to get a lot of information about what they looked at, what they found, that type of a thing. I don't think we have a final copy of the study yet, but that might be informative. But a lot of this might go back to the number of officers that were requested and the number of officers that were funded during last year's budget process and this year's budget process. And to the extent that that was constrained, not by the council, but with the request, then that puts you in a little bit of a box here. And I don't know what the answer is, but I think it's a good point that whenever you are hiring officers, that's the time when you have the most flexibility, or funding officers to be hired, the most flexibility to create a new program or to be sure that the needs are met. And so the chief is now expressing that overtime is a difficult thing to use for meeting a need. True. The real opportunity is in funding those officers. So do you want to ask the chief, say you wanted to fund more officers, and you don't have to wait for the new budget or anything like that to do that. When would it work? When could the department do a new class or that type of a thing? So you're not just asking what can you do with overtime, but what can you do to meet the need that you have expressed?
I agree, Cindy. I think, yes, we can talk about capacity building as far as hiring more officers going forward. I think my question for tonight, though, is this money that we're set to vote on, essentially approve, it will go towards funding between now and April security for this square and this building. Is that accurate? And then in April, some would go towards what we've talked about before about the bathrooms?
Yeah, the 4 officers from 10 to 2.
I don't think those two mix, do they? You're not changing the building funding. The building funding is the building funding, and it relates to the building and the grounds.
Mm-hmm.
But that isn't transferred to the other parks in the city system at any time, is it?
No. And just for clarification, I took the proposal, I think that was in your packet from Parks as to what they would like to see and ran the numbers out. It would be $1.1 million to accomplish that staffing level for 8 months.
You're saying it's $2.2 million for the year to do what?
Oh, it'd be 1.1.
You said for 6 months.
No, for 9 months. When I ran out the numbers for the different shifts that they felt like they needed to patrol the parks, the urban land, the trailway, and all those things, it'd be 1.1 million. I've got the numbers here, but I think we'd be better. That's 10 officers. I would rather hire 10 officers than live on overtime.
So that was my question too, Chief, is I know that sometimes overtime is used as a perk for officers, right?
Mm-hmm.
How much of that is currently being used for our officers as a perk? I mean, you say we're capped out at 1,400 hours, right? How many?
Well, no, they work all different types of shifts.
I
but-
understand that, but
yeah.
how many hours are police officers saying, you know what, I can get as much overtime as I want? And if we hire these officers, what is that going to do if we hire more officers and it takes down that overtime? So, I mean, I'm more than willing to fund more police officers, but
Yeah.
if it means that we're doing it at the detriment to the other officers who are expecting X amount of hours for overtime.
Right. No, but we looked at the numbers, and about 50% of our officers actually participate in overtime. So there are a lot of others that don't. So if the number came down, there would be more overtime for everyone. So again, it's a tricky to read the tea leaves and find out where that saturation point is. But when you start to see on our POSI, which is our overtime employment schedule, when you start to see shifts not being filled, you start thinking, is there too much overtime out there? So what I'm saying is if we're really going to look at $1.1 million for overtime, why don't we look at $1.1 million and hire some more cops?
Correct. So before we go into something else, I need to have a clarification. Maybe Ben can do this for me. The only thing that we're voting on tonight is the transitional funding. Is that correct? Everything else we'll be able to hear again in December?
That is correct. Because the transition period begins tomorrow, the funding needs to be available for tomorrow.
So these are questions that we can have that can come back to us in December that I think that we need to reiterate with the questions that we've got.
And this
Staff has been, we've got it, and we're grateful for the video record too.
Okay, so I'm just going to go down this row here one more time for council members to say one last thing before we move on. Okay, Councilmember Johnston, we're not coming back.
I'm just looking for the briefing, the closed session briefing prior to that discussion as well.
On
Building security.
Building security. Okay, we would love to do that, but no Patrick Leary or David Lidback tonight. So
But we can try to schedule it for the next.
the next meeting. Councilmember Wharton.
I just want to add to the questions, since we're going to be getting the briefing from the outside group. Can we have them address, when you say 50% of our officers are using overtime and those overtime hours are going up to 30 or more, I don't remember exactly the number, in the 30s that you said, is that appropriate and is that standard in other departments? So I'd like to know that too for the briefing. We don't need that tonight.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, awesome. So other items other than the police staffing.
The next item is A12. This is a request for $27,000 from the general fund funds balance for a capital improvement program and impact fee administrator. This would be a new full-time employee in the CAN director's office working on CIP and impact fees. The council asked for additional information such as a job description, which is pending. I do want to remind the council that in the fiscal year 20 annual budget, you funded a full-time financial analyst to focus on CIP in the finance department. That position is filled. If you approved this additional position in CAN, they would be working very closely with that financial analyst. The position is currently only requesting. The $27,000 that's requested in the budget amendment is only for 3 months. At the last briefing, it was discussed that there would be benefits of hiring the position in time for January so that it's better aligned with the annual CIP and annual budget preparation processes. That would be an additional 3 months, so that would be doubling it from the current $27,000 that's requested. There's a straw poll if the council supports that approach. You could do a straw poll for early hire advertising, or you could request additional information about, we're waiting for the job description, but also additional information about how this position would work with the other departments, since CIP is a multi-department process.
So, council members, are you fine with doubling the amount to, I've got one. Councilmember Wharton, there's two. I'm up to. So, yeah, that's great. Double the money.
Okay, so that'd be $54,000. The other update is the council asked for information about the second deputy director in hand. As a reminder, the council created this position in the fiscal year 16 annual budget as a project coordinator to implement master plans, specifically implementing the master plans through zoning and CIP funding to kind of kickstart the master plans that have been adopted by the council. The position was changed to a deputy director the following fiscal year, 2017. The pay stayed the same, but changing the title was perceived as an incentive for hiring of the position. Under prior hand leadership, the position was focusing on housing development and not on implementing master plans. The position was then downgraded to a pay grade of 32 and was reclassified to a policy and program manager. And the position was then this fiscal year transferred to the CAN director's office as part of the larger transfer of CIP and real estate functions from hand into the CAN director's office. So there's a policy question if the council would like to talk with the administration about the original intent of an FTE focused on implementing master plans and how that could be advanced, or if the council wanted to revisit this specific position, although it has been moved and reclassified from the original intent and name.
My only question on this is, it's been, what, 3 years? Has this position ever been filled?
The position has been filled, but it was focused on housing development under prior hand leadership instead of being focused on master plan implementation. At one point, former city employee Matt Dahl was focused on it, and he was working on master plan implementation. Of course, he's left the city a few years ago.
Yeah, he went to Midway.
I'm not sure if the position is currently filled.
Okay. Any questions on this, council members? Currently filled. It's been notified, yes. Okay, great. Thank you.
The next item is D2. This was a $1.5 million request for home investment partnership. This is one of the 4 federal grants the city receives each year from the Housing and Urban Development Department. We are still waiting on written responses, but I just want to highlight that the dollar amounts in the staff report, $2 million in their fund cash. This reflects receipts from loans that have been paid back. That would be the funding source for this $1.5 million increase. The $1.5 million was typically included in annual budgets, but it was not in fiscal year 20, which is why it's appearing in this budget amendment. The other dollar amount of $14.5 million
is listed as a fund balance, which is a bit of a misnomer in this case. It is not cash in an account. It is $14.5 million for the outstanding portfolio of loans for first-time mortgages and for major renovations and rehabilitation. So there's not 14 million sitting in an account. It's at some point that money is expected to be repaid. We hope to get the written responses in time for the next briefing to provide additional details on this item. And then there are two council items. One is additional funding for Three Creeks Confluence funding. This is I-3. Councilmember Johnston requested this item be added. It is currently got a $200,000 placeholder. It would be intended to preserve flexibility for this project. It may be familiar, in August, the council appropriated.
Will you hold on one second?
I'm
till
going
we
to
figure
recuse on
something
this
out?
one, okay? Thanks.
Thanks, Ben.
In August, the council appropriated $500,000 to purchase land adjacent to this new city park. The administration has updated information about this property matter that would probably be better to discuss in a closed session. I do want to point out that the staff report has a table for all of the existing funding sources for the Three Creeks Confluence Park, if you want to take a look at that. And the $200,000 in additional funding, there are 5 possible funding sources. There's the surplus land fund, there are parks impact fees, the general funds fund balance, and this project is eligible to access up to $50,000 from the CIP cost overrun account. And the project also received $606,000 in TRCC funding from the county, and the reimbursements that the county would fund could then be a funding source to reimburse one of these other funding accounts. So if the council wanted fund balance to cover it, next year, when the county reimburses that $606,000, some of that money could then reimburse the general fund balance for fronting the money at this point. If there are specific questions, staff can follow up on those. Otherwise, it would probably be best to continue the discussion in a closed session.
Any questions other than a closed session? No? Awesome.
And that takes us to the transition expenses. And there is a proposal to adjust this from the administration's recommendation. I don't know if Councilmember Mendenhall wants to come back for this, or if she wants to stay.
No, I don't. I think she wants to be recused on this as well.
Okay, I'll proceed.
You can explain the request, can't you?
Yes. The changes from the administration's proposal are, instead of funding the incoming mayor's salary and benefits at 50% as the transition ordinance states, instead the funding would go to a communications director for the incoming mayor. So it's the $17,365 going to the communications director instead of the incoming mayor. The other change is the administration forwarded the budget amendment with a most expensive scenario, which was assuming 3 new council members. We now know that there's only 1, so we can reduce the incoming council member expenses to just 1/3. The other change is the funding for transition-related expenses for the council office can also be reduced to 1/3, since there's only 1 incoming council member instead of 3, which was the original estimate. Taken together, these changes are $20,681 less than the administration's proposal. This is coming from the general fund's fund balance. And there would be 4 temporary positions that would be funded. And once the transition period is over on January 6th, those temporary positions would then transition into the regular full-time employee positions.
Questions? All right. That's great. Wait, Lynn Pace has something to say, the interim city attorney.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify a couple of things to make sure I agree with everything Ben has described, but the transition ordinance is not entirely clear, and so we have had to extrapolate a little bit as to how to apply that. The transition ordinance contemplates what the council may do, but it doesn't bind the council to do anything. And so then the council can, of course, just adopt an ordinance as per the proposal. But that didn't fit this year either, because we have, the mayor-elect is an individual who intends to remain on the council, and you can't be paid by the council and paid by the administration at the same time. So, just to make sure everyone understands what we're doing here, these are going to be 4 temporary employee positions. So they will become city employees tomorrow on a receiving benefits and half salary, et cetera, through the inauguration. In the ordinary scenario, the council member-elect position will be placed within the city council structure. The transition employees in the ordinary course would have been placed within the mayor's office under the supervision and direction of the mayor-elect. But in this case, the mayor-elect is not going to be one of those employees. So we're creating 3 transitional employees selected by the mayor-elect, but who will then be operating without direct line item supervision within the structure, if that makes sense. So to make all of that work under the direction from the council office, those positions have been placed within human resources rather than within the mayor's office, just for that transition period. So is that clear as mud?
Thank you for that explanation.
Okay.
It was very thorough.
All right, thank you.
That is it for the budget amendment. We'll have this detailed table on the transition expenses as part of the motion sheet for reference and transparency for anyone who wants to take a look. The rest of the items are scheduled to be voted on at one of the December meetings.
One more item too, I
Just
think.
quickly, Deputy Director of CAN, Jennifer McGrath, has indicated that they have sent us the job description that was in question, and we must have missed that, so she's resending that.
I believe it was sent to finance, but it didn't make it through to the council office. But it'd be good to get that.
Great. Okay, and we'll follow up with them on whatever else if we are missing anything. Thanks.
Great, thank you very much for these. And tonight, we are looking at taking action only on the transitional funding. And for the rest of this agenda, items 12 and 13, we're actually going to bump till next week. So if you're on that item, you are off the hook. But we are looking to go into a closed meeting. We need to look for a motion for that.
Mr. Chair, I move that we go into a closed session for the purposes of discussing strategy on pending or reasonably imminent litigation.
Second.
A motion by Councilmember Wharton, a second by Councilmember Valdemoros. We need to roll call this. Councilmember Valdemoros? I'm a yes. Councilmember Mendenhall, Wharton?
Yes.
And Johnston?
Yes.
All yeses. So if you don't need to be here for the closed meeting like myself, you can excuse yourself.
Dinner now or later?
Grab your dinner and bring it in, I guess, yeah.